Hello dear viewers, thank you for choosing the Manhwa compilation channel. Please leave feedback in the comments after watching. Enjoy watching. The main character accidentally crossed into another world and became the founding lord. Here many obstacles and dangerous mythical creatures await him. City of Solon. Many people come here every day to find something worthwhile for themselves. Well, he finally arrived in Solon. And it is from this place that his own path to becoming a powerful lord begins. The original owner of this body was beaten to death for stealing, and Richard's soul immediately occupied this body after it came into this world. The original owner of this body was from the famous Orlando family. In fact, the Lord had many reasons to run to this particular place. This should be the starting point of his new life. The Almighty Lord System was what it was called. Ruler Solon had terrible news for the young lord. He informed him about this immediately from the doorway. The head of the Orlando family, his father Calvin Orlando, died last week, and his half-brother, Wenger Orlando, was appointed as the new successor of their family. He had long considered his brother Richard a thorn in his side. The main character couldn't believe his ears. Many thoughts were spinning in his head. Since Richard was the illegitimate son of Calvin, he was not loved or accepted. Now I didn't understand what exactly the ruler of Solon was driving at. In order to avoid problems, the illegitimate son had to give up his name. If he nevertheless agrees to this and refuses, then his brother will give him 500 zlotys to create his own territory. They brought him this chest with zlotys. It is obvious that he must make a decision now and quickly. Having opened the chest, the youngest son took one coin and began to examine it. This should have meant that he agreed, but he wouldn't have any problems with money in his new life. That made him happy. The ruler took this gesture as consent and concluded that there would be no problems in the future. Richard looked back with contempt. The name Orlando evokes thoughts of success and glory. This is the most beautiful name that the main character received from his father. This phrase was regarded as not quite a refusal, but the ruler was, to put it mildly, amazed. Richard believed that his brother should give him more money, and then they would come to an agreement. The ruler of the city of Solon was at a loss, so he asked again. He needed to think about it. As a compromise, he still offered 1,000 zlotys and interest-free loans, but on the condition that the illegitimate son will buy the necessary goods only in the market of this city. The clink of coins echoed off the palace walls. Richard agreed. This was a good compromise, and moreover, it suited both sides. After a minute of pause, the main character said that he had heard about a certain group of barbarian slaves who were in the Colosseum. Richard's interest in this was that he wanted to use slave soldiers to create an army. It's not a bad idea, but was the young lord sure that this is exactly what he wanted, and with his 1,000 zlotys? After all, this group of barbarians was unusually uncontrollable. They were known for their bravery and desire for freedom, so the lord could not expect them to obey his orders. It was for this reason that Richard chose them. According to calculations, there were 20 zlotys per person, but there were 50. The ruler ordered to immediately send the main character to the Colosseum. Great. This was the first step on the path to success. Richard unconditionally followed the servant to the star-spangled Colosseum. The ruler of the city of Solon considered Richard an unusual boy. He had great potential. People wandered around an alien world for 10 years, and sometimes missed their former happy life. Looking out the carriage window, Richard hummed some kind of song, and the servant became interested in what exactly these words meant. Lord replied that it was just a simple song from his hometown. After the original owner of this body was beaten to death, the protagonist took his body, and at the same time he received the Lord System. Then, day by day, he studied martial arts and honed his fighting skills. Initially, Richard wanted to become a knight, but who would have thought that old Calvin was so crazy? That he gave the boy the name Orlando, which evokes thoughts of success and glory. The main character could not believe that it all went to him, to a boy who lives on the street. Fortunately, the Lord received permission to expand his territory, so he fled to Solon. Otherwise, he would have simply been destroyed by other members of this family. After a few tens of minutes, the servant reported that they were there. Having met the first person he met who apparently worked here, the main character asked whether they had really brought a group of barbarian slaves here. It was true. The worker of this place did not know why these young people came here, so she asked again. Richard explained that Count Augustus wished to sell them to him, and would support him while he formed his army to defend his territory. She clearly did not expect such an answer, because she thought that they had arrived only to watch the battle. The woman told them that these guys kill absolutely all the fighters, and she is left to spend money on treatment. The woman did not understand why such an aristocrat needed such people with such a worthless body. After all, they will smear them against the wall and run away as soon as they get the opportunity. Well, that's okay, who is lucky and who is not. But this group of barbarian slaves can still kill crocodiles and eat their meat. Richard was pleased with the fact that they could get their own food, which was great. He believed that perhaps they would be obedient if he personally beat them. The hostess was shocked by such self-confidence. She said that these people could kill wild boars in 2 or 3 hits. They are simply non-humans. The woman looked at him and thought that he was crazy. Just crazy. Richard turned to her and replied that it was only his business and no one else's. It is better to say that the stronger the barbarian slaves, the greater their chance of meeting all his expectations. Moreover, the main character had a trump card in the form of this system. Lord System. Level, 35th. Strength, 45. Agility, 35. Intelligence, 11. Charm, 12. Also in this system, there was a store in his personal inventory. Skills, Ironbone, 10. Heavy Attack, 10. Shield, 5. Riding, 6. Management, 2. Trade, 2. Weaponry, 8. And also swordsmanship was at the highest level. He achieved this result after 3 years of continuous training. Today, Richard will finally show all his skills. Walking out onto the terrace of the Colosseum, he looked down at the people there. Without hesitation, he decided to contact them, starting with the fact that he bought them all from Count Solon. Richard knew that none of them wanted to become a slave, and so he proposed a deal. If they fight him, they will have complete freedom. Well, what if they lose? The Lord came down to them. They will have to fight for him! Battle. This is what these people live for. It will be good fun for them. They were considered the best in this business. This proposal from Richard stunned the ruler's mistress and servant. Indeed, it was a bold move. But this is just part of the plan, more to come. Don't cry when you lose. This phrase was given to the main character by a barbarian slave. Before the battle, the barbarian introduced himself first. His name was Russell. For the sake of decency, the main character also introduced himself and called himself Richard of Pompeii. This aristocrat was really going to fight the barbarian. A mountain barbarian named Russell was the best of them. He killed many fighters with just one blow. Fighting him will be more deadly than beneficial. In connection with this opinion, the woman ordered the servant accompanying the Lord to immediately go and dissuade him from this idea. To which he replied that his only task was to carry out the orders of the Count and deliver him here. He really had no right to manage Richard's subordinates, much less himself. This woman has worked in this place for more than half of her life and has never seen such a daredevil in all these years. And now she found herself in such a precarious position. She knew that if this aristocrat died, then her arena would be a cursed place forever. Meanwhile, other barbarians were discussing this upcoming battle. They believed that Russell's choice was certain death, and that without even making any effort he would deal with the boy. But even they understood that if the aristocrat died, it would be a big problem, but they still turned it into a joke. But Russell seemed to have a slightly different opinion. He promised to be merciless in this fight. The mountain barbarian accelerated. He was already so close to Richard. He attacked him, grabbing him by the shoulders. It was exciting. With a powerful jerk, the barbarian pulled him towards him. He grabbed the collar of the jacket with his powerful grip. Without making any effort, he lifted the boy into the air above his head. And with all my might, he threw him to the ground. The tiles under his feet cracked from the impact. It would seem that this is the end. The Lord was defeated. This meant that the barbarians were given honestly one freedom. But is this really so? Moving a little away from the boy's body, Russell was disappointed that this fight had passed so quickly. He expected at least a little fun. Their fight lasted only a couple of seconds, but it seemed like a couple of minutes. Other barbarians with smiles on their faces noticed that their friend had even destroyed the earth. They were very interested in whether the boy survived. Seeing this picture, the hostess did not know what to do. She asked someone to help him. If he really died, then her arena will have to pay considerable compensation. And suddenly Richard came to his senses. Without getting up, he grabbed the barbarian's leg. Russell did not expect such a turn of events. From surprise, he was speechless. He could only watch as the Lord quietly and leisurely tried to get up. Everyone who watched this fight was shocked. The owner of the arena shouted louder than anyone. The new owner of these people said that he was afraid that this barbarian would think that this was bullying, and therefore allowed him to start first. The Lord wasted no time in hitting the barbarian back. Russell didn't understand how this boy could stand so calmly on his feet as if he hadn't even broken the slabs under his feet. The barbarian never made mistakes. Richard's enchanted power did not come easily to him. He trained non-stop for 3 years and perfected his Lord system. With such an opportunity to demonstrate it, there was no way he could lose to such a barbarian with such terrible skills. The battle had just begun, and so Richard suggested not to waste time and continue it. The barbarian slave was only annoyed by his words and expression. He attacked him. It seems the little lord was not at all afraid. He grabbed his hand and threw him over himself. That was the end. This meant that the boy had won. Russell did not understand how this happened and what he did and how he was able to win. Barbarian slaves are accustomed to getting theirs in any way and achieving their goals quickly and easily. And that is why Russell suggested repeating this fight again. One more time. Russell thought that this would be enough. The younger Orlando was very surprised. He did not give up, and to some extent this is even good. Richard accepted his offer to continue. All the barbarian slaves did not understand what was happening. Russell will definitely win this time. The barbarians seemed to not believe their eyes. Before, no one had defeated the strongest of them, and so quickly. The repeated battle began with the young lord grabbing the barbarian's hand. As a result, Russell fell to the ground in confusion. He was no longer so sure that he would be able to win. He fell without having time to get up, and so many times. He fell on whatever he had to, the little lord amazed with his strength. The training was really effective. Having no strength, Russell tried to get up again. Richard thought he would finally give in. All beaten and exhausted, the barbarian stood up for the last time and asked to repeat it again. He continued to claim that he could stand on his feet and still had a lot of strength. That's how these people are. They didn't know how to lose, and they didn't want to admit it at all. One of these people tried to dissuade his friend from this idea. Russell lost 10 times and in truth no longer had the strength to fight. He needed to give up. What was the barbarian's face when he heard this number? There was horror on his face, but subconsciously he could not believe it. He has won countless times and never lost until today. And suddenly all this action was interrupted by a girl who entered the battlefield. Apparently she had been watching all of this from the very beginning. The barbarian slaves addressed her as Chief. The girl looked sternly and ordered to stop immediately, saying that she had already disgraced herself enough. Without hesitation, she said that the young master would now have to fight with her. Her gaze showed determination and great spiritual strength. It's strange that no one agreed to fight further after they defeated Russell the first time. After all, their freedom was at stake. But how could Richard afford to fight the girl? With her appearance in the arena, the barbarian slaves seemed to believe in themselves again. They all concluded that the aristocrat would now come to an end. The young lord was not frightened by such a statement. He asked her if she really had the right to make such decisions. She knew she just had to beat him. But still I decided to ask again and make sure of this. She was sure that when the boy lost to her, they would all be free. But she wasn't sure he would keep his word. The lord assured her that he was a man of his word and everything would be as he had said from the very beginning. Hearing these words, the girl decided to finally start this fight. The young master didn't expect her to be so fast. Lord System, Barbarian Gunther. This girl was defined as a hero. She attacked him with a powerful stream of energy and he was slightly blown away by the wind. It was a strong blow. Richard should quickly develop good tactics that will give him a better chance of winning. The system's pop-up window distracted him a little and ruined everything. He sees the hero for the first time. But still, I decided to see how strong she is and what she is like as a hero. While he was thinking, the girl was already acting. Her feet left the ground at breakneck speed. She saw that the boy was distracted from time to time and lost in thought. Therefore, she asked him, the man, not to be distracted. Otherwise, this fight would not be fair. She landed with a powerful impact right in front of him. The barbarian slaves were of course delighted that their boss would obviously win this fight. The owner of the arena was very worried about her arena, because it was being destroyed before her eyes. The ruler's servant was amazed by the extremely great strength of the young lord. He believed that this would not end well. Meanwhile, the hero girl, with the great power of her hands, tore out a piece of stone from the arena. It didn't cost her the slightest effort. Watching this, the barbarian slaves from all sides shouted for her to kill the self-confident boy. No one dares to stand in the way of their boss. She was sure that with a blow of a stone she would end him once and for all. The stone was approaching Richard at great speed. The boulder landed directly on the young lord. The owner of the arena was terribly scared. Everything was bad, this is the end. The hero girl killed him, and now the owner of the arena did not know what to do. The barbarians were extremely delighted. Their boss gave them freedom. They rejoiced and praised her. Even Russell, standing on the sidelines, was happy, even though he didn't win. From what he saw, he concluded that the young boy did not have enough strength to win this time. Great speed and incredible strength. Richard was not as simple as they all thought. At that moment, the stone under the girl's foot began to rise. To be honest, they definitely didn't expect this. Until the very end, the girl thought that she imagined it. Getting up, the young lord noticed that cobblestone is a good material. The barbarians were at a loss. Richard is still alive, standing, withstood such an attack and is ready to fight further. The hero girl watched him for a second. She found this very interesting, so she offered to continue unconditionally and immediately. The young master of these people winked at her and said that to be the boss of the barbarians, brute force is not enough. He was sure that she would not defeat him like this. But she didn't waste any time. Deciding to take advantage of her speed while he spoke, she found herself behind him, with a chain wrapped around his neck. Richard gasped in surprise. His neck was pulled with great force. The hero girl politely apologized for it before she tackled him to the ground. The sound of the impact echoed throughout the arena. The girl was sure that this was his loss. Richard pretended to be amazed, and tried to convince her that she had used the stone to distract attention. Breaking the chain around his neck, he said only 2 words, "You are amazing." There was no end to the bottomless surprise of the barbarian slaves. Russell also did not understand how this was possible. Okay, I defeated him, but defeating the boss seemed unrealistic. These iron chains were forged by the finest dwarf craftsmen. They were used to shackle animals. These chains kept the hero girl constrained for so many years, and then some boy appeared and broke them with his bare hands. This is unthinkable. Rising up, the young master of these barbarians concluded that the girl was fast, strong, and perfectly suited for the role of a subordinate. The girl realized that all this time this boy had not used his real strength. What kind of monster is he? She asked him since they were both in the same field. He must respect her and give his best. Otherwise, she would never obey him. But before that, she was also shackled with these chains, which means she was not in the best condition. Now is the time for the real battle to begin. Richard attacked her first. After delivering the first blow, he jumped into the air. He decided to use her technique, landing right next to her. The hero girl managed to jump a little to the side. His speed was much faster than hers. All the barbarians also noticed this, and he was stronger than her. Using his speed, he instantly found himself behind her. Without thinking twice, he grabbed her by the neck and threw her to the ground. The girl could not move or breathe. She was smarter than Russell, and therefore admitted that she lost. If he wants to take revenge, then let him not hesitate and do it right now. He swung at her. The girl closed her eyes out of fear and surprise. But instead of finishing her off, he struck her with 2 powerful blows. He freed her wrists and neck from the chains. She didn't know what to say. This was an unexpected turn of events. With this action, Richard gave her and everyone a choice. The barbarian slaves could all take turns continuing to fight him, or else they could have joined him. Together they will become much stronger. He extended his hand to her, inviting her to rise. The hero girl looked at his outstretched hand and then at him. She accepted his offer and shook his hand. Richard helped her up. Having tuned into the speech, the girl shouted for everyone to shut up and listen to her. She said that from this day on, the young aristocratic lord would be their leader. After her words, Richard had the opportunity to introduce himself and say that he would soon become an all-powerful lord. The young lord begged them here to join him now, promising that together they would become much stronger. The barbarians needed a little time to think things over. They looked at each other and made a decision. They recognized him as the boss and join him. The barbarians promised that from now on, they would follow his orders. The owner of the arena was in terrible shock, and the servant of the city ruler, Solon, believed that it was not for nothing that old Orlando passed on his name to this boy. At this moment, the Lord system appeared. These were systemic requests from barbarians who wanted to really join him. He had to accept or reject. Of course, the new leader of the barbarians accepted. Except, there's no turning back now. Soon we will see the appearance of a new character, and the emergence of new mythical creatures, a wild world filled with chaos and blood. Here, countless ambitious people became lords and created a world of their own reality. However, many died and left this world in complete despair. As a pioneer, Richard can't wait to start his journey. Now that he had the barbarians, he took his first step in this new life. Now the new leader of the barbarians was worried about that he needs to dress up his newly minted army. Entering the store, the barbarian slaves were slightly taken aback. For them, it was either new, or they really sold luxurious clothes for real warriors there. They couldn't believe that they came here because the boss wanted to buy them new clothes. One of the barbarians has already looked for a new t-shirt, and the hero girl said that it doesn't suit him. The owner of this store, the dwarf Negan, greeted the new customers and offered them his help. Approaching the counter, the young lord said that he had come here solely to purchase new equipment for all his people. He heard that this is the place where they sell the best weapons. The dwarf noticed that the boy knew well about the range of his goods. The dwarf turned his back to Richard and pressed on a tiny brick in the wall. Shelves with clothes gave way to shelves with weapons. The barbarians were a little surprised. After all, they had never seen the walls move before. The owner of this wonderful store asked what exactly they needed, and he didn't miss the opportunity to show off the variety of his products. The barbarians' eyes widened. They did not know what to grab onto. There was absolutely everything on the shelves, from swords and bows and arrows to axes and even a harp that lulled you to sleep with its melody. Richard asked the owner to give each pike and 3 javelins. The dwarf said that a pike and 3 throwing spears would cost 15 zlotys, and a total of 750 zlotys would have to be paid for all 50 people. The young lord spent all the money he had. That was all that was left. This was not enough to buy the necessary things. The gnome apologized and hastened to say that his store does not do business with the poor and does not issue loans. Seeing that the shelves began to change back to shelves with clothes, the hero girl turned to her boss. Nobody understood what happened. Richard asked the owner to take his time. He pulled his belt and showed him his sword. This sword was the so-called Snake Killer. For the first time in his life, the dwarf saw such a legendary weapon. The owner thought that since he has such a high-quality and legendary sword, he must be an important person and should not be contradicted. Giving the sword back to Richard, The dwarf explained that it would be sad to leave this weapon gathering dust on the shelves. The dwarf decided to offer to give the sword back, and in return, he would allow him to sign a contract according to which Richard would pay the entire remaining cost on credit. The young lord immediately turned around and ordered each barbarian to take a pike and 3 throwing spears, and also add leather armor. This is necessary to prepare for the trip. This sword was worth hers too, so the shop owner agreed. The dwarf ordered to bring all the ordered items. There was no end to the joys of the barbarians. They praised their boss. After waiting for the right moment, the hero girl asked what to do next. After a short pause, the lord announced that they would seize the land that rightfully belongs to them. Literally half an hour later, they set off. Their journey began with empty land, meadows, and fields. Someone who watched them noticed that it had been a long time since caravans or pioneers had passed through this place. It was the goblin leader, Carson. He also noticed that his victim had a lot of things and materials with him. Hearing about the weapon, the jackal leader demanded to give him at least half. This did not suit the goblin leader. There are many more jackals than goblins. Everyone knows that goblins are slow-witted. After watching them, the goblin and the jackal decided to wait a little until the pioneers approached the hunting grounds, and then they will not have the opportunity to escape or call for help. For the jackals, the main thing was that they had a good fight. They thought it was a perfect plan. The hero girl heard some strange rustling noises and warned that there might be a tail behind them. Richard knew this from the very beginning. It was a little offensive for the girl that, having a plan, he didn't even share it with her. Turning to the barbarians, the young lord ordered everyone to stop. Their task was to surround the cart, bring all the animals inside, put all their things, and prepare for the attack. He then asked the barbarian couple to come closer. They didn't understand what he wanted from them. He passed some kind of bag into the girl's hands, and he ordered the contents to be distributed to everyone, and be sure to make sure that everyone swallowed it. 1 ball for each. Richard told everyone that these were pills from the east that could make them stronger. Now it was necessary to quickly swallow them and prepare for the attack. The barbarians had never heard of such a thing before and did not even think that such a thing could exist. The young lord lied. It was just dumplings. This was supposed to serve as a distraction so that he could take advantage of the system. It was only necessary to find the right moment to use it. Richard opened each barbarian's manual, and I looked at everyone's improvement personally. Most of the barbarians in the system were defined as soldiers, and had some at the initial level, and some at the second and third. The Lord clicked on the heroes field in the hope that there was at least one more hero in his army besides the girl. He opened the girl's enhancements. Gunther alone was defined as a hero. Barbarians will gain experience after battles and will be automatically upgraded by the system. This happens because the system is too powerful. In a short period of time, the overall strength will increase, and they will sense something wrong. That's why Richard used these dumplings as a decoy. They will all feel the power of the magic pill. A goblin watching through a telescope reported that the pioneers had stopped. The leader of the jackals rejoiced and said that they would all die. Goblin Kirsten did not understand what exactly made the jackal happy. After all, the fact that their production stopped was very strange and suspicious. The jackal argued his joy by saying that he thought they were scared. The bandits really thought that the barbarians were afraid of their strength and decided to simply surrender. The jackal ordered his men to attack and not take prisoners. The barbarians noticed that they were already attacking, and Richard ordered his men to prepare for the attack. Everyone returned to their original positions. The head of the jackals ordered everyone who wants weapons to go and take them away. The bandits' mission was to destroy and take lives. There were many more of them than 50 barbarians, but Richard convinced everyone that they had become much stronger and were ready to win. He ordered his army to advance. His hand hung in the air for a split second along with the spear. He swung it and threw it forward. This was most likely a rash decision. The young lord put all his strength and all the power of the system into this throw. The spear flew straight to the target. He aimed it at the goblin leader. Harson was not as weak as he seemed. He put his wrist under the blow and knocked the spear away from him. The goblin noticed that it was powerful, but not threatening enough. The commander of the goblin pen shouted to his men that there were far fewer barbarians and they had no choice but to die. He ordered the attack. Jackals and goblins rushed to the offensive. The barbarians were a little afraid of this attack. They saw that no matter how strong they were, they would not be able to defeat such an Arava. The jackals were already close. The jackals were so fast that the barbarians were unable to attack first in time. A terrible massacre began. Some were killed and others were wounded. In the goblin pen, there were also giant trolls. Using their clear advantage, they scattered everyone as if blowing away feathers. The barbarians were surrounded. Still, they will not give up, and that is why they decided to attack. Russell attacked first. The jackals killed him as 3 of them attacked one, and the trolls destroyed several more barbarians. Gunther didn't know what to do and turned to Richard. The boss, observing what was happening, asked Gunther to give him another spear. But she was sure that he would not be able to destroy these trolls this way. But there was no need to kill them all. It was enough to find the right target and aim very accurately. The time to turn on the system has come. Richard didn't know if it would help or not, but at least he had to take the risk. He swung. With internal energy, he transferred fire from his hands to the spear. Gunther was surprised that fire appeared at the tip of the spear. The young lord, examining his target, swung and his hand hung in the air again. Gathering all his strength, the lord threw it, and within a moment the giant troll's head flew off his shoulders. The bandits did not understand what had happened. They were all very scared when it dawned on them. The jackals were the first to run. They were so frightened that they could not understand how the troll could be killed with one blow of a spear. The head of the jackals shouted at them not to run away. Coming closer to his people, the young boss said that now they need to destroy another giant troll. The fact that the boss killed the troll with one blow of his spear greatly motivated the barbarians, and they threw all their fear aside and rushed to the attack. Russell, who was attacked by 3 jackals at once, gathered all his forces and fought them off. Getting up, he ordered everyone to fight and fight back. Behind him, he suddenly heard a noise, as if someone was running. It was the leader of the jackals. He swung at the barbarian. The barbarian had no time left to defend himself, but he breathed a sigh of relief when the body of a jackal fell next to him. Someone pierced his lungs with a powerful blow from a spear. Richard's next target was this jackal. He saved his man, and for Russell it was unexpected and awkward. Descending from the cart, the boss took out his sword. After informing everyone that the leader of the jackals was dead and the bandits had no strength left, he ordered everyone to advance and destroy everyone. After his words, the barbarians seemed to have a surge of strength and they began to gradually win. Gunther admired Richard's plan. She thought it was excellent. In response, he told her a simple truth. In order to catch all the bandits, you must first finish off their leader. But there is one more interesting character left. The goblin leader became very angry. He called his people a bunch of losers and could not understand how this simple man defeated so many bandits so quickly. This is how he gave himself away. Richard immediately realized that he was the leader of the goblins. The boss asked him who exactly planned this attack. The young lord found it commendable that Carson planned all this, attacked and was not afraid of the fact that there might be much stronger representatives of another race on his way. The goblin explained that the nearest other race was in the high mountain fortress, which was a couple of miles to the east. It is easy to defend, but difficult to besiege. Richard thanked the goblin for such detailed information. It could really be useful. Without hesitation, he took his sword. Carson prepared to attack. The young lord promised that he would give the goblin a blow from this sword as a trophy. In a second, the goblin was dead. This was bad news for the other goblins. They watched this in horror and dubbed the boy a monster. The hero girl ordered the remaining bandits to be killed. The barbarians were just waiting for this order. From terrible fear, the goblins did not understand what to do and where to run. Urgent system notification. Barbarian Spearman has been promoted from level 3 to level 4. Richard began to look through all the notifications, and this was good news. At this moment, the barbarians began to feel some changes and a surge of strength in themselves. They thought it was the pills that had that effect. One of the barbarians even offered to sell the remaining goblins, because they could get a considerable sum. The barbarians even managed to subdue the giant troll and brought him to the boss. Since one horse was killed, the boss decided that this troll would carry the things. And Gunther found Harson's map and also brought it to the lord. This was a good find. After studying it a little and finding the right point, the boss raised his head and looked at his people. Their next stop was the high mountain fortress. Having collected all their things, they headed along the map to this fortress. The young boss noticed that the troll was quite fast, and at this rate they would reach their destination faster than planned. Richard decided to look at the system. He opened his system panel. Now his level was 36, strength, 46, agility, 35, intelligence, 11, charisma, 12. The abilities and mastery of all types of weapons have also improved. After each upgrade, he received bonus points for his attributes and the system itself. In the system, the store button was still inactive. In order to open it, you first had to level up the strength and throw ability points. Weapon proficiency can be improved not only by adding points, but also by participating in battles. However, the attribute bonus was limited to talents, and he did not have any magical talents. Richard could only choose hand-to-hand combat. Right now, he is 10 times stronger than an ordinary person. A minute later, Gunther reported that they had already arrived at the foot of the high mountain fortress. The boss leaned out of the cart and looked around the area. It turned out that everything was not so bad here, but on the contrary, it was very beautiful. At the foot there was a river. The water in it was very clean and transparent. The barbarians immediately rushed to swim. They lived all their lives in the Colosseum, and that's why they stank so terribly. One of the barbarians called Gunther to also join them, and she replied that he should wash himself first. There were many wild animals in this area. A couple of barbarians went hunting and brought back good prey. These guys have a lot of survival skills, and it's just amazing. Turning towards Gunther, the boss noticed that she was sniffing herself. He came closer and said that she had been fighting too much lately and she needed to rest. There was a hidden pond there, and he showed how to get to it. He reassured her that he would watch the guys while she was swimming. The girl smiled at him and thanked him. It was so quiet there that you could hear droplets of water rolling off the leaves. This was an extremely amazing opportunity for her to be alone and bathe from the heart. A light wind blew across her body and got tangled in her hair. Evening. The barbarians came right up to the fortress. The young lord ordered everyone to get ready and said that they would make an excellent camp from this place. A pack of dogs called kobolds occupied this place. Russell suggested that due to their size, these dogs were not so strong and the barbarians could easily defeat them. Seeing this, Richard ordered an attack without delay. Meanwhile, in the fortress, in the master's room, a very exciting moment was taking place. The owner asked his woman for a favor, but she zealously refused the stupid dog. And at that moment, they were interrupted by Richard kicking down the door. The owner did not understand who he was and what happened. Ordering everyone to gather immediately, he realized that an invasion had occurred. Entering inside, one of the barbarians reported that they had dealt with the kobolds outside. The boss thanked them for their good work. The owner was horrified. Putting his fear aside, the kobold leader angrily asked how these people dared to attack his army. He also said that he had a gang nearby. If something happens to him, they won't leave a wet spot. The dog threatened Richard and his men to simply wait quietly for their punishment. But this only made the young lord laugh. A couple of minutes later, the kobold was already hanging upside down, tied by his leg with a rope. He asked for forgiveness for being so arrogant. The lord ordered to untie him. Gunther guessed that he wanted to let him go and voiced her guess. The boss confirmed her words. The rope was cut. The girl ordered the kobold leader to get out of sight, and he ran so fast out of fear that he never even stumbled. Turning around, he thought that they would still get theirs. He had never been so insulted before. Russell didn't expect them to take this high mountain fortress so quickly. These kobolds are so useless. Meanwhile, the young lord had already examined the building from the inside. There was a lot of space in the fortress. It was more than enough to set up a decent lair. All the facilities in the fortress were very well equipped. The field of vision is also excellent here. They could see absolutely everything within a couple of miles around. The fortress was surrounded on all sides by a large fence, and at the back there was a dense forest. Having laid out the map found on the goblin, Richard began to examine it more accurately. Just a couple of minutes later, he called all the barbarians to gather around the table and listen to him. Now they need to hold their first battle meeting. Some of the guys were a little unhappy about having to fight again. The high mountain fortress was located at a high altitude. According to the goblin, it was easy to attack and very difficult to defend. There was also an abundant source of fresh water nearby, so it was a truly good place for a base. If this place was occupied by kobolds, then it was indeed possible that they had a large army nearby. Just an hour ago, they released their leader. Won't this come back to haunt them? Russell, like all barbarians, was most concerned about this question. It is possible that right now the leader of the kobolds is leading his army directly to the fortress. Richard's army spent a lot of money on weapons and equipment, so it's time to think about where you can earn a couple of dozen zlotys. It was better to attack them all at once rather than attack each kobold one at a time. The young boss tossed a single coin into the air while contemplating his plan. With a sharp movement, placing the coin on the table, he was about to voice his plan with a stern and serious face. They will simply kill everything at once in one fell swoop. But how? In a week. Evening. Dinner tonight was simply delicious. What could be better than meat soup and potatoes with bacon? Gunther sat down next to the boss and decided to ask about the fact that many days had passed, and the kobolds still had not done anything. She, like most barbarians, is impatient. Haste will ruin everything. Their meal was interrupted by a barbarian spearman. He reported that the boss was right about something. It turned out that there was a combat detachment nearby. It looked like the kobolds were launching a sneak attack. Well, we finally got it. Here's the money. Richard, getting up from the table, ordered everyone to quickly prepare for battle. Having reached the site of the hidden kobold camp, the barbarians watched them and tried to understand their tactics. The guards decided to sleep near their tents before the sneak attack. The leader of the kobolds managed to call the goblins to help him. Great. The barbarians will just take advantage of this opportunity. Richard needed to restore his dominance over the Highland fortress. Turning to the others, the Lord said that he would only take Gunther's detachment with him, and the rest were to return and guard the fortress along with the troll. Now more than ever, they needed to finish this matter quickly. Gunther agreed with her boss more than ever. The detachment led by the girl was ordered to move quietly and unnoticed. They should have killed everyone who was in the tents without making too much noise. Gunther's hand rested on the curtain of the tent and opened it a little. Going inside, she quietly dealt with everyone who was there. This day became a day of judgment for many. Highland barbarians have excellent individual abilities. but their team abilities leave much to be desired. The main problem is that they did not have proper training. Strength alone will not make them qualified soldiers. Gunther commanded a couple of barbarians to stay in the hollow and destroy the remaining goblins. Now these barbarians have become elite soldiers, capable of organizing their forces. The system gave them much more than just an increase in strength. What a bunch of losers these goblins are. And in an instant, Russell noticed that the ground under his feet began to shake, and he literally fell into the ground. A huge Draco goblin crawled out of the ground. The barbarians were a little frightened by this giant with horns, but still remained in their places. This was the only type of goblin that had dragon blood in its veins, so they called him Draco Goblin. Following him, other goblins began to crawl out of the ground, but smaller ones, which was already pleasing. The barbarians were shocked. There were a lot of goblins. This turn of events was clearly not in Richard's plan. Gunther warned him to be extremely careful, because this goblin was very difficult to deal with, but it was possible. In an instant, the Draco Goblin began to summon his huge monster. Just huge cracks appeared in the ground. It was a terrible sight. A creature of unimaginable size half crawled out of the ground. This led to even greater horror for the barbarians who were there. Now having such help and strength, the goblin dragon became more talkative. He considered all barbarians to be pathetic losers. He pointed his weapon at the target and said that it was time for the blood of the dragon to punish all these people. Gunther, who came closer, ordered the Draco Goblin to close his mouth. She was clearly determined to deal with him. She threw her spear at the monster, but the spear broke into 2 pieces with a crash on the thick and durable shell. The hero girl never expected this, although I didn't immediately realize that this monster was actually an armadillo. Such a pathetic attack made the goblin laugh. He wanted them all to know their place and to know the true power of the noble dragon blood. This hurt Gunther so much that she became even more angry and drew her sword. But Richard suddenly appeared. He covered the girl with himself. He used the system to gain unimaginable power. Running up to the animal, he grabbed its paw with his hands. Squeezing his hands harder, he pulled slightly towards himself. It was an unimaginable force and load as well. His feet broke the ground a little where he stood. The young lord gathered his strength and began to lift the healthy carcass of this monster. He lifted it above himself, and then with powerful jerks began to spin it in the air above his head. He finally let go of his hands, and the animal fell, losing consciousness. The rest of the goblins were speechless. And then they started screaming. Russell wondered how strong a Draco Goblin could be. The Draco Goblin, who had fallen from the saddle of the animal, did not understand how this was possible. As the young boss came closer to him, he ridiculed this noble blood. Or maybe at least there will be enough nobility to surrender? But it seems the representative of dragon blood had slightly different plans. He can never give up. Swinging his weapon, the Draco Goblin was sure that the stupid boy was finished. Is it so? Behind the thick dust that rose, nothing was visible. Richard gave this goblin what he deserved. Meanwhile, I managed to admire his courage. He held his hand, and at that moment, as if by order, the Draco Goblin fell to the ground without any signs of life. Like the boss said, it was all over very quickly. He opened the system to see what he had now. Meanwhile, the goblins had a lot of useful weapons, so the barbarians collected them all. Lord System. Experience, plus 175. He also opened updates for the barbarians, many of whom of course increased in level, and Gunther leveled up to level 2 and received a reward, plus a point. Richard decided to add this point simply to her strength, and then she just called him. They brought him a very valuable gift. Having found a chest in the tent, the barbarian spearman opened it, but there was nothing else there except 2 gold coins. These goblins were poor guys, and from what they found in their camp, the boss deduced that they had fallen on hard times themselves. Gunther came closer and asked what they should do with this animal now. Richard looked at him and made an involuntary joke about what the meat of this beast might taste like. Placing his hand on it, he quietly said that from now on this beast's name is Windrunner, and he will carry his new owner. And if the beast disobeys him, the boss will feed everyone his meat. Gunther suggested returning to the fortress and having lunch. The weather was absolutely beautiful. Opening the system again, the Lord began to study the new changes. Fortunately, the shop function has finally opened. He examined the entire range of weapons, but since his wallet was now empty, he could only afford weapons at a discount. He bought an old-fashioned spear for only 800 coins. The purchase was successful. The system began to assemble his weapons piece by piece, and finally it was ready. So that's how it works. Gunther also saw some fragments of this purchase. She thought that the boss could use special magic. Out of the corner of his ear, he heard some movement and asked Gunther about it. It seemed to the barbarian that it was a group of jackals who were engaged in robbery. Taking his telescope, Richard began to see what was happening there. He immediately guessed who it was. It was a rich caravan. It is not surprising that they attracted the attention of the jackals. It looks like this was no ordinary caravan, Gunther suggested, intervening. The first trading experience was very important for the Pioneer Lord. Perhaps this caravan will help him with business in the future. Meanwhile, the jackals had already attacked a couple of trade carts and demanded to give up all the money, arguing that they were passing through their territory. The old man driving one of the carts said that they were a Voya trading company, and if they are harmed, the Imperial Army will not spare anyone. Was it really the Pompeian army itself? Hearing this, the jackals only became even more invigorated to win a good sum. They are bandits, and that's why they weren't scared. Apparently, the new leader of the jackals ordered an attack. Those who accompanied the old man shouted to him to run away now. But as soon as he turned his back to run, the jackal struck his back with his sword. The old man fell, saying that he would give all the money and asking him to spare them. But the jackal replied that it was too late to ask for mercy. He was sure that now no one would help them. And at that moment, a sharp spear pierced the jackal's body. The jackals were slightly terrified, and the old man froze in anticipation. The young lord's new spear worked quite well. Gunther, considering that it was time, ordered the rest of the barbarians to attack. The jackals did not understand who exactly these guys were, and therefore did not know how to act. These jackals are nothing more than a bunch of bandits. This time Richard will just be an observer. The hero girl ordered not to lag behind anyone and to divide into two fronts. Of course, the barbarians were strong in this battle. They attacked in unison. But as a pioneer, the young lord was more impressed by a disciplined army of fighters. And this is what his army needed most for a brilliant victory. At the same time, one of the jackals noticed that the second one was running away and called out to him. He rushed to stop him, and he, in turn, realized who exactly these people were. He said that they destroyed the alliance with goblins, trolls, and jackals, and they even easily conquered the lands of the Kobold Fortress. They were the ones who appeared unexpectedly. They named Richard, the noble and legendary lord of the Wildlands. Realizing the danger to themselves, they considered themselves cursed and began to run away. But Carminative appeared from the ground and dined on one of the jackals. And then the second one. Richard watched this and admired his army. This time, his army was actually able to finish off the jackals without his intervention. Now they were no longer the confused and scattered bunch that they had been before. Russell reported that they destroyed all the jackals and now everything is in order. A rustling sound was heard behind the boss. These were the people they saved. One of them approached him and thanked him for his help. He promised that he would sing praises in his honor. But Richard replied that if they wanted to show their gratitude, then they should just give at least a little money. As expected from a greedy aristocrat. This was the opinion of the one who just now got out of the cart. It was a girl, and she found him to be a truly interesting person. She must have already heard about him. Coming closer, she introduced herself. It turned out that she is a trader from Voya, and her name is Annie. She turned to her servant immediately after she heard him cough. She asked about his health, but he replied that everything was fine. Then they both bowed and thanked the barbarians for their selfless rescue. Richard's soldiers were brave, and the jackals were no match for them. Russell heard this and was a little upset because under normal circumstances their boss would never boast about them. The girl said that she would like to ask the young lord for help. The young boss asked again because at first he was a little surprised. How could he help? As he could see, the trading company had suffered heavy losses, and many people had been injured or killed. And in this state they could not complete the deal with other caravans, and she hoped that they could stay with the young lord for a while. Richard hastened to warn that living on his estate costs a lot of money. In his homeland, this estate would be called a 5-star hotel. The girl said that she wanted to use weapons and money as payment for services. She ordered her servant, Rudo, to bring something. He returned a couple of seconds later with something in his hands. Richard didn't know what it was, and so Annie asked him to look very carefully. A large round ball began to rise into the air from her hands, and she asked it to increase. It was a communication crystal. The girl used it to send a signal for help to their trading caravan, and the boss asked when reinforcements would arrive. But they needed at least 3 days. The place where Annie is now located is too far from the city of Koren. Richard was right. This is still an unusual caravan, and when his business starts, he can easily earn a lot of money. Without wasting any time, he invited them to follow him and his men. In the meantime, he managed to introduce himself. He also said that he could never refuse friendly guests. Annie asked to take care of them. 2 hours later, they arrived at the high mountain fortress. All victims were given water. Their wounds were treated and bandaged. Annie poured some kind of potion into the water and asked Rudo to give some to everyone. Seeing this, Richard immediately knew exactly what it was. This is a legendary healing potion. Description: unavailable due to low level. Creation: a high-level mage personally blessed the creation of this potion, and it is also supplemented with the magic of a mid-level mage. Effect: instantly heals a wounded person, and if the dose is increased tenfold, it can revive even the dead. Price: 50,000 dinars per bottle. This price was very high. Richard was very interested in how such a caravan got such a powerful tool. Annie's servant needed to check everyone and everything in this fortress. It was already night. The servant reported that they had no problems with finances or belongings. but half of their people were wounded or killed. What poor people? Fortunately, the young lord and the barbarians made it in time. Otherwise, the losses would have been much greater. Annie wondered what her servant thought about Richard. His opinion of him was very good. He considered him a great lord. After all, when the jackals attacked them, they were already in a desperate state. The moment the boss appeared, Rudo was attacked by a jackal. And at that moment, the barbarians came to the aid of his weakness and immediately turned the situation upside down. They are brave and good-natured people, and the trading company was lucky to meet them in these lands. Moreover, the young lord's soldiers are very strong. Rudo believed that their personal troops were not even close to the barbarians, and Annie replied that without them they would not have survived. Meanwhile, the boss was thinking that the caravan soldiers were well equipped. It probably looks more impressive. And at that moment, next to him, the barbarians were arguing over who would get the good weapons. Their arguments brought Richard out of his thoughts. This time, the young boss not only received caravan armor without paying a penny, but also something valuable to himself. Fred's battle axe, it was a reward from the system. He was also pleased that his warriors had grown up a little. At that moment, Gunther appeared. She reported that it seemed that something had happened a little further from the fortress. Richard took her words as panic. Right now, a large armed group of half-humans, half-horses is heading towards the high mountain fortress. Richard asked again, since he had never heard of these creatures before. They were almost there. They are clearly not in the mood to drink tea. Their leader was a girl named Verisk. Her armed group reached the fortress in a matter of minutes. This fortress inspired enormous power that had not existed before. This armed group of half-humans and half-horses is the Storm Clan. As soon as the girl came closer, a spear was aimed at her with a quiet, almost inaudible ringing. This attack was quite expected. She now not only heard but also saw spears that were flying straight at them. This meant that they were not welcome here. But the one who abandoned them did not intend to kill the uninvited guests. Heather couldn't help but notice how powerful the throw was. After making sure that the attack had stopped, she ordered everyone to advance further. This made the young lord laugh a little. They ignored his warnings and still did not explain why they came. The barbarians began to continue attacking with spears. Richard threw his spear, taking the girl as his target. But she was not so weak. She instantly repelled the threat to her life. She realized that the barbarians were not joking and ordered everyone to stop. Taking out a white handkerchief as a sign of negotiations, she thought that it was dangerous to go further at such a distance, and she could no longer risk it. She seemed very smart. Gunther reported that the centaurs seemed to have given up. The boss offered to host them and talk. Their intentions were not clear, so there is no point in removing the protection yet. Gunther and the others were in complete agreement with the young boss. Coming out to them, Richard came close to the girl. He asked about their intentions, and for what purpose they came to this fortress. The girl introduced herself and said that she came with good intentions. The young lord introduced himself in response. Hearing his name, she realized that this was the same invincible Richard from the martial arts competition in the southern province. He was delighted to learn that they knew so much about him. The girl told him that his reputation had spread quite far. Even the Storm Clan, who live in the wilderness, heard about his achievements. The boss did not brag, and therefore simply replied that it was an undeserved reputation. The Storm Clan has arrived with something important to announce. The young lord took the tablet from her hands and began to examine it, but he did not understand a word about what was written there. The girl said that the locals want to create an army, and it was they who sent this invitation to the clan. Gunther and Russell also joined in their dialogue. Gunther began to read. The message said that the high mountain fortress used to belong to the kobolds, and now it is necessary to form a powerful army and go against the enemy. From this text, Gunther concluded that the locals always hated the conquerors. And now she thought that the boss knew what this invitation meant to them. Richard immediately realized that they wanted to retake this fortress. But without the support of other groups, they could not do this. Heather said that the kobolds had already enlisted the help of shamans and sorcerers. She also said that their strength should not be underestimated. But the boss still couldn't understand why they told them about it. Do they really want to help? He wasn't wrong. Since the barbarians will face great difficulties in the near future, the Storm Clan offers them their help. The young lord also asked why they were helping him and not the kobolds. Heather said that the Storm Clan once belonged to the Orc Kingdom. There they were slaves and poor people. That is why now they will not join the local bandits and will not do evil. At the same time, they still lived a quiet life for the most part. Their people also had an amazing culture of poetry and writing, as well as good manners. Now they want to rely on the power of a powerful lord to be able to return these old days. The system received their requests, which means that they really want to join. Having opened the system, Richard learned that these centaurs can fight at great distances and have excellent vision. He also opened the biography of Veresk. She was a hero, like Gunther. Abilities: long and short bow, heavy machete, and her only weakness was the fear of fire. Having let the centaur into the fortress, the young lord began to introduce them to the rest of the barbarians and traders. The boss said that Heather brought a lot of bad news. It was even worse for Annie's people. But she became even more wary. Soon enough, the kobolds and jackals will declare war on them again. Annie asked Richard how soon they would appear on the territory of the high mountain fortress. He thought for a bit and still answered, perhaps 5 days, or maybe even, at least 10 days. Hearing his thoughts, the barbarians thought that this was a good opportunity to kick their enemy's ass, and Annie and Rudo were at a loss. Although the local kobolds already had an army, it included many different races. They have accurately divided the work, and are now preparing food for the army. Indeed, according to general estimates, it will take them at least 10 days to get to the fortress. The young barbarian boss admitted that the enemy was strong, and even greater than he had imagined. After all, they don't know what magicians and sorcerers are capable of. But he knew one thing for sure. They have 10 days, and that is enough to prepare. 15 minutes later, the boss announced that he had created the entire strategy to defeat the enemy. Gunther was amazed at how quickly the whole plan was thought through. But Richard asked everyone not to worry. They will learn everything in their own time. At the moment, the young lord had a request for Miss Annie. This was necessary so that she and her people could meet such a formidable enemy. She asked him not to delay or hide anything, but to tell everything as it is. The boss wanted to borrow 500 gold coins from her. If it helps, then of course it's not a problem for her. She'll give everything. The high mountain fortress will always be grateful for her generosity. Between all the things, in order to better prepare the attack, the boss decided to ask Heather how well the centaurs wielded bows and arrows. Everyone in the Storm clan was proficient in this type of weapon. Having opened the system, the young lord went to the weapons store section. There were 500,000 dinars on the balance sheet, and the weapons themselves, bows and arrows, were not very expensive. But still, buying each centaur a bow and arrow would be very expensive. Equipment for soldiers truly eats up a lot of money. After a little inspection of the store's assortment, he chose a purple bow and a pointed arrow with a white feather. He handed the weapon to Heather so that she could try it in action. Seeing that the boss had a weapon out of nowhere, she guessed that he was using magic. But Richard replied that this was just a small trick. Taking the bow and arrows from his hands, Heather began to examine the new thing. And after a moment, I wanted to try it in action, and she fired the first arrow. And only when she hit the target did she consider this weapon good. As expected, her technique is excellent. These centaurs will greatly strengthen the distance defense of the high mountain fortress. The girl thanked him for such a gift. It had been a long time since she had held a good bow in her hands. Tomorrow she will be able to train fully. Rudo suddenly appeared and said that something incomprehensible was happening. It turned out that Annie's people had found reinforcements for the caravan, and it looked like they were under attack. Richard called Heather to go with him and find out what happened. Annie guessed it was an attack by nasty jackals. Arriving at the scene of the attack, the boss asked Annie what happened here. After looking around, they realized that all the reinforcements had been destroyed. Due to this incident, it became clear that the high mountain fortress was not safe now, so the young lord suggested that Miss Annie send the caravan back to the city of Solon. The surviving soldiers said that even if they took healthy horses and a large number of people, if they met jackals along the way, they would quickly lose to them. Miss Annie abandoned this idea. She could not and did not want to leave the wounded members of the caravan. After all, they risked their lives to fight and protect her. After thinking a little, the young lord said that in such a dangerous situation, the rent would be more expensive. What he saw today was worth 2,000 zlotys. Annie replied that she should do as she sees fit. The spears that killed these people were very rough and smelled of Chinese pine. It looks like the jackals forged these tips themselves. It was hard to imagine that locals or savages could do this. Miss Annie told Gunther, who was passing by, that there were actually a lot more savages than they thought. There are many more powerful tribes in the north itself. These large tribes included close to thousands of adult soldiers, and they often fight over territory to strengthen their army. They even learn to forge their own weapons. Their strength is no match for the local savages. Heather suggested that Miss Annie believed that the caravan was attacked not by jackals, but by ice natives. And she was right. According to the latest news, the local kobolds were gathering an army, and she doubted that the appearance of the ice aborigines was a coincidence. Richard also thought she was right. Their joining the army is obvious. They had better come all at once so Gunther could take them out with one blow. Gunther is right. They just need to be caught all together. 10 days have passed since that moment. The barbarians, centaurs, and caravan diligently prepared for the attack and planned everything to the smallest detail. Returning from reconnaissance, 2 centaurs reported that they had discovered enemies. The boss inquired about their whereabouts at this time. The ice aborigines settled at the foot of the mountain, about 50 miles from the fortress. It looked like they were planning to attack the next day. The barbarians and everyone have been waiting for this for so long, and the time has finally come. The young lord ordered to call all the people in the fortress to announce the important news. He ordered the army to prepare. It's time to fight and eradicate this evil forever. The fighting spirit was what was needed. All soldiers received orders not to leave anyone alive. Having donned all his equipment, the boss was ready to lead his army to victory. Having put on all the armor, he felt its heaviness. Annie and Rudo wondered what his plan was. First, the centaurs were required to shoot everyone with an arrow, and then attack everyone. If you manage to kill at least 100, the rest will fall on their own. Is this really the whole plan he was talking about in the first place? There were at least 6 armies on the enemy side, which is much more than their fortress. This scared Annie, but the boss reassured them and asked them not to worry. The army of the Ice Aborigines was indeed much larger than their army, and it seems that they are already ready to attack. Looking through a telescope, the leader of the Jackal army concluded that Richard's army was too small and they had asked for certain death. The leader of the Jackals turned to the leader of the Kobolds, saying that this time the enemies must be destroyed very quickly. And the Kobold warned that there was no need to rush too much, because the leader of the Barbarians was strong. But the Jackal didn't really believe his words. The boy couldn't possibly be stronger. This time, the Kobolds gathered a good and large army. Everyone was assembled, and therefore they were confident that they would quickly win and recapture the high mountain fortress. Richard felt it necessary to start this with a motivational speech. God gave their enemies lives, but they do not value them. And that is why now they must win. He ordered to prepare for battle. Both sides received orders to advance. Following the plan, the centaurs were the first in the ranks and began to shoot arrows one after another. They hit the target exactly, but hitting the ice natives was a little problematic since they had shields. The young lord ordered everyone to advance quickly. The Aborigines also began their attack with spears. Their spears could not pierce the scales of Carminative, but when they did, they never hit the soldiers. Coming closer to each other, both sides received orders to send each of them to the next world. Suddenly the ground began to shake. A Draco goblin crawled out of the ground. This was a great chance to get revenge on Richard. Noticing him, the boss headed towards him on Carminative. Without delay, he ordered the animal to show everything he was capable of. The Carminative dispersed everyone in its path. Meanwhile, the young lord took advantage of this moment to wound the Draco goblin. The second was Russell, who wounded him even more. And Gunther was the last to decide his fate once and for all. Gunther ordered everyone not to leave anyone alive and not to spare anyone. The young lord began to be attacked by the ice natives. One after another, they appeared in front of him. Time to use the gift of the system. As soon as Richard's gun took the desired shape, he was attacked by an Aborigine. He managed to throw the boss out of the saddle. At that moment, he realized that these guys were really strong and their weapons were good. Several natives were still heading towards him, but he repelled their attacks with a powerful blow. He managed to eliminate almost everyone. During this battle, the lord truly became very strong. Even Gunther and Russell noticed this. They thought he had turned into a devil. Watching what was happening through a telescope, the leaders of the Jackals and Kobolds were seriously frightened. They did not imagine that their large army could be defeated. The Jackal turned to the shaman for help, asking him to use magic. The Kobold also believed that it was time to help his own. The shaman, hearing their request, began to say something in the language of runes, and within a second, the fire above which he uttered these words flared high into the sky. All that was left was to say a few words and the spell would work. He finished. A huge fiery meteorite was formed from the fire. Now the Jackal was confident of the imminent death of his enemies. Richard heard some strange ringing in his ears. Turning around, he saw a fireball. He immediately guessed that this was the magic of a shaman. The shaman controlled this ball with the help of his staff and magical incantations. This ball took the form of a dragon and flew straight towards the barbarians. Seeing this, the young lord shouted to everyone to be extremely careful. This ball landed right in the center where the battle was taking place. Richard didn't expect this shaman to be so strong. Annie was right. Many of the lord's army were injured. These spells were very powerful. Richard admitted this because he himself got hurt for the first time. Looking ahead, he realized that he needed to find a way to deal with the shaman as quickly as possible. She's also a girl too. Looking closer, he saw that she was controlling the fire with a cane. Heather went to help him. She arrived just in time. He had an idea. The young lord asked her to try to shoot the shaman from such a considerable distance. She agreed. She also asked a couple of her guys to help her shoot at her command. Taking aim, she gave the order to shoot. And also they should not have stopped. They shot a rain of arrows and the Jackal saw it. He ordered to protect the shaman at all costs. The ice natives protected him with their shields. While planning further actions, the young lord ordered to find an opportunity and organize a surprise attack. The Jackal gave the order to protect and not leave the shaman, then everything will be fine. The Jackal commander wanted to propose some idea to protect their army, but he was interrupted. He felt a sudden pain in his chest. He was wounded by Richard's spear, and the ice natives were also wounded by arrows because they lowered their shields in surprise. The Jackal fell right on top of the shaman, and the cane cracked under his weight. As a result, the fireball's power was directed towards those who caused it. The force of the fireball shattered him into small pieces. The fire burned half of the Aborigines. They screamed and asked for help. They died from their injuries. Richard was amused by such a sudden friendly attack. The kobold rushed to the jackal commander, Su Mulan. The kobold was terrified. Confused, he turned to the shaman. They both didn't know what to do now. But after thinking a little, the shaman walked up to her tambourine and began to use magic. The victory was for the high mountain fortress, and therefore the time had come to clean up after ourselves. In a moment, the young lord realized that not everything was over yet. The shaman used blood magic. Thanks to this, all the defeated jackals and ice natives rose from the dead. Only now they were much stronger. They were evil and now only wanted revenge. The young lord decided to use a little system. He drew his sword. Thanks to the system, he became faster than usual, and this gave him a great advantage. First he dealt with the jackal commander, and then with the giant aborigine. Having cleared everyone in his path, he stopped for a second to look around. Gathering all his strength, he again moved into battle. There were too many natives, but he dealt with them. Gunther also dealt with them well. Their goal was to get to the kobold and the shaman, and finally the boss got to them. It was all over for them. But the kobold put the shaman on his neck and began to run. But of course they failed to do this. The shaman fell and began to thrash violently. She was in a lot of pain. Richard finally caught her. It seems that he knew her before, as he said that he did not think that she would turn out to be a witch. Taking both of them by the scruff of the neck, the young boss turned to Gunther. He asked what happened to the barbarian spearman named Nat. He had a very serious wound and needed a doctor urgently. The young lord abandoned the shaman. He turned to her. She killed a lot of people, and he asked to help them. She replied that she was forced to, and she asked Modil to contact her. The fact that she argued with him made him say that she would suffer in all possible ways. Hearing this, she agreed to heal the wounded. Sitting down next to Nat, she began to whisper magic spells. Suddenly all the pain went away and he felt a surge of strength that made him stand up. His wound was successfully removed. And this is amazing! After the work done, Modil stated that she was tired. Everyone was happy that Nat was healthy. It was as if his wound had never happened. Richard noticed that Modil is powerful not only in destruction but also in healing people. She could be of great use to them in the high mountain fortress. Gunther asked what they should do now with the jackals and goblins. The young lord ordered people to be brought in and everything cleaned up. The boss proposed making all survivors slaves. This time they had a big catch. But it was a joke. In fact, no one except the shaman and the kobold seemed to survive. The young lord decided to test the system. And he discovered that after this battle, everyone had updates. There were too many improvements. Many people became heroes and were upgraded to the 3rd or 2nd level. Gunther was also wondering what to do with the shaman. She inquired about this. The boss ordered to take them with him and find out from them where their base is located. Having opened the system again already in the fortress, the young lord divided the heather leveling points between strength and speed. He hoped he only made things better for her. I also looked at other updates. He also improved her speed and leg strength, which she needs more than anyone else. At that moment, she appeared in the room and reported that they could not find out anything from the shaman. Also, when Richard asked about torture, she replied that they tried all types of torture and threats, but she never said anything. Catching a phoenix is not as easy as catching a chicken. He decided to show how to talk. Arriving at the room where the shaman and the kobold were being tortured, Modil's threats were immediately heard. She screamed that they should not touch her, otherwise she would turn everyone into insects. Turning her head, she noticed the young lord. She was waiting for him to say that he should monitor his subordinates. They didn't respect her at all. In response to her words, he smiled and politely asked where their base was. But she wasn't going to say anything. Modil had said this many times. She argued that she had dragon blood and could not betray her people. These words angered Richard. He decided to ask her again about the location of the base. And only after that, she said that the base was located 200 miles from the fortress. The young lord asked how many warriors in their tribe were there. And she replied that there was not a single one left there. The army of the Almighty Lord defeated everyone. He warned the shaman that if she lied, then they would all watch her teeth fall out. But she swore that she was telling the truth. All the soldiers went to war, and there were only old women and children left at the base. He also asked how many spells she knew. There are many different shamans in the wild. Modil has the blood of a red dragon, so she has mastered fire magic to perfection. She said that in the wild she knows a minotaur shaman who can control the earth element, create avalanches, and destroy the soil. There are also troll shamans who can control trees and all plants that kill all living things. It seems that Richard did not fully appreciate their abilities. A wild environment, much more dangerous than he expected. The boss decided to immediately go with Heather to Gunther and draw up a plan to attack the enemy base. But it is still not clear what to do with the kobold and the shaman. The lord decided to check them both and said that they were useless and should be buried behind the mountain. And at that moment Modil spoke, that it is still useful and may come in handy. Richard was expecting this, but still decided to ask how she could help them. When she arrived at the high mountain fortress, she noticed 2 huge monsters. Huge desert monsters can also train magicians. She wished they didn't think they were so stupid. At first glance, she understood. that they are special magicians, and since Modul was a shaman, she could teach them. Until that moment. Until they become azure shamans with infinite mana. 2 days have passed since that moment. Construction within the fortress was in full swing. Richard commanded the workers and ordered them to do everything faster and not be lazy. Most of the work was done by slaves whom they took captive from the battle. During these 2 days, they were clearly very tired. Approaching Verisk, the boss asked about how things were going. She reported that everything was going according to plan. Until evening, they were going to destroy the fortress and rebuild it. To defeat the enemy, it was first necessary to improve the fortress. The young lord asked the slaves to bring more granite for the foundation and strengthening of the city walls. He wanted to change the appearance of the mountain castle and make it the strongest castle in the wasteland. Now the boss wanted to discuss something with Verisk. The shaman said that their headquarters in the mountains was 200 miles from the fortress, and now he wanted to ask her to check if this was true. She guessed that he still intended to destroy the remnants by the enemy in order to avoid large losses in the future. But he replied that it was up to her and her people to destroy the remnants of the enemy. According to Modul, only old people and children remained there. But it's not worth the risk. Now more than ever, they had to be careful. Richard said that right now, Heather and the rest of the centaurs are stronger and faster than before. She agreed with this. After all, just recently she felt the wind under her hooves, as if she had learned to fly. She informed the other centaurs that they were moving out right now. The young lord warned them to remember that if anything went wrong, they should return immediately. It's time to finally see the results of the shaman's training. The shaman and the trolls trained along the river. She gave them a physical task to destroy trees, but in truth she thought they were stupid. Richard's sudden appearance startled her. She trained them for 2 days, and there should already be progress, at least minimal. The trolls got tired quickly, so they couldn't really demonstrate their skills. She confirmed that there is no progress yet. She freaked out and called the trolls terrible. During these 2 days, she built herself a new staff, and now, in front of the Lord, she decided to demonstrate how it should be done. With the help of magic, she gifted them with small abilities that were supposed to unlock the troll's potential a little faster. She told about the first troll. He awakened the Starskin skill to avoid the wind. But the young lord did not understand the meaning. She used some more magic and asked him to look carefully. To evade the wind, this troll became invisible. It is amazing. The boss asked about another troll, wondering what he could do. But awakening magic takes time and space. Other slaves have not yet developed their skills. The invisibility technique is not very strong, but it still increases the magical power of the Lord's army. At that moment, Annie appeared. She asked what the Lord and shaman were so busy with. He shared with her that they were training trolls. He also asked why she returned so early. She said that she was going to take all the things in the cart to the dwarves, but her path led her to this place. There was coal in the cart. Richard kept wanting to ask her about this from the first minute of the meeting. Why does she need so much coal? She said that they exchange it with the gnomes for gold coins and peat. The Lord still doesn't understand what the dwarves will do with the coal. It is obvious that they smelt iron from it. The young lord asked how much coal they needed to smelt iron. Annie said that there were gnomes 150 miles to the west from the fortress. And last year they found mineral veins in the Holy Lake, Bayux. Since then, they contacted Voya's trading caravan and asked for coal to be delivered to them. The bigger, the better. At that moment, their conversation was interrupted by a falcon. He brought a letter, and Annie asked what was in it. This was a warning from Lord Corona. He asks the aristocrats to return to the city. He reports that a large wave is coming. Heather is back, and she immediately rushed to Richard. He wasn't the least bit surprised that they were back so quickly. He asked about her well-being. It seemed to him that she was wounded. They must have met enemies after all. She said that there is no danger in the shaman and jackal tribes. On the way back, the centaurs found a mountain of dwarven corpses. The entire field was littered with their bodies, but it was not clear who exactly they were fighting with. Until Heather saw something frightening. She didn't have time to finish. Richard said the word instead. She saw a bear man. She couldn't understand how he knew about this. But what she was talking about was written in the warning from Corona. A huge wave of bear tribe is moving towards the fortress. The aristocrats may get hurt. Annie asked what he was going to do. Did he want to return to the city with her? But he could not run away from danger and return to the city. The boss asked Heather to rest for a while. She agreed and left, but Annie still could not understand what he was going to do. In response to her question, he only said that he did not think that her deal with the dwarves would now take place, and he offered to give the coal to him in the armory. As he approached the tents, he welcomed Annie into his personal armory. She was surprised that they created their own armory. A mountain castle must have enough weapons to fight enemies. Turning to Gunther, he asked if his weapon was ready. She reported that it was made the way he wanted. He decided to show everyone his new handsome man. He effectively removed the cloth from the weapon. This weapon is only available in Richard's homeland. Evening. They all went to the place where Heather met the bearman. Arriving there, the young lord asked if this was the place. Heather confirmed. Annie found frighteningly huge bear paw prints. There were a lot of tracks, which meant there was a whole crowd of bear people. The time Heather and the rest of the centaurs met them, many were forced to flee in despair just to escape. Fortunately, Richard upgraded the centaurs in the system and added speed to them. Otherwise, they would not be as lucky as the gnomes. The barbarians received a request to see if there was anything useful left in the tents. But everything was stolen. No gold, no food. These bear men are the most cruel and greedy creatures. They would not leave anything of value. But the young lord thought a little differently. Everyone has their own concept of value. Turning around, he saw a jug. As he came closer, he saw some dark liquid inside. Annie and Russell came over too, but they didn't know what exactly it was. Richard guessed it was soy sauce. It seems that the bear people really don't understand the value of soy sauce. Annie said that gnomes pickle vegetables well and make high-quality soy sauce. But she didn't understand why the young boss was so happy when he found it. It turned out that this was the first time he had seen soy sauce in this area. It would be a great addition to food. Richard said that he was going to open a restaurant in the city of Quran. In this way, he will feed the aristocrats of the city. Thanks to this and their fortress, more money will appear. Annie didn't think the billionaire could handle the business. The sun had already completely set. It was too late to return back to the high mountain fortress, so the young lord ordered that they spend the night in these tents. Rudo thought that they had arrived at this place to simply reconnoiter the situation. He's right. This is all just reconnaissance, but they couldn't return without seeing the enemy. Annie asked her boss what was on his mind. The army of bearmen was heading south to the dwarves, and the people from the fortress should stick to their side. She was angry that Richard was now resting, and she did not understand at all what he was doing. The young lord thought that Annie knew why the bear people started wars. She assumed it was all for the sake of iron ore. And she was right, because iron ore is irreplaceable. In an era of war and blood, the one with more resources has the initiative. After all, this ore did not belong to the dwarves or bearmen. Due to this, Richard wanted to borrow it. But Annie did not support this idea. Hundreds of people from nearby lands dug deep and did not even see a glimpse of iron. The young lord asked her if it was dangerous and if she was ready to join him. In addition, the high mountain fortress is now stronger than it was before. Gunther and Russell were already ready. They and the rest of the barbarians supported this idea. The prisoners and trolls led by the shaman didn't mind either. Even Richard had his own squad of magicians. Doesn't Miss Annie think that his squad is stronger than the others? She asked him if he was sure about this. Of course, he was confident in this and in his people. If he still manages to convince Miss Annie, then he will be able to get closer to the dwarves. And so he suggested that when this was all over, he would divide this iron ore with her in half. And only on this condition did she agree. Returning to the fortress, the young lord gathered all his men and ordered them to line up in ranks. This time they took part in the battle for the high mountain fortress and for themselves. In this war they must be the sword that cuts through all enemies. The barbarians were ready to destroy the enemy. Richard ordered everyone to be ready and not to relax. Dwarven Castle. Approaching him, the young lord noticed some movement ahead. He ordered everyone to stop and warned that there was someone ahead. He saw tubes of reeds sticking up in the water. And at that moment, warriors, rabbits, jumped out of the water. The young boss shouted to everyone to be careful. The barbarians hid in the bushes, and it seems that the rabbits did not notice anyone. It seems that these rabbits were preparing a secret attack on the dwarves' castle. Richard thought this was strange. Weren't the bear people supposed to fight the dwarves? What were the rabbits doing here? There was something wrong with this. Annie assumed that the rabbits had formed an alliance with the bear people. Realizing her words, the young boss became thoughtful. Races as strong as bears rarely use their powers to attack, and therefore rabbits will help them with this. The lord was a little upset that they all knew about it, but didn't tell him anything. But who would have thought that he didn't even know this? For these words, the shaman received a light blow to the head. Let her not think that because of her short stature, her enemies will never notice her. In parallel with this, the rabbits have almost invaded the fortress. They were so quiet and careful that the dwarves sleeping at the post did not even hear them. But when the rabbits came closer, one of the guards woke up. This time the rabbits attacked first. The rest of the dwarves also woke up and began to sound the alarm. The rabbits were advancing from Lake Bayux. The remaining guards joined to fight for the fortress. The dwarf commander ordered the remaining dwarf archers to prepare to attack. Coming out of the fortress, a detachment of gnomes entered into battle with the rabbits. The dwarven archers were ordered to shoot, but the rabbits were ready for such a turn of events. The arrows didn't hit the target at all like the rabbits had shields. This helped them advance further. They advanced faster and faster. A second detachment of gnomes came out of the fortress and also began to attack. They were just in time. The rabbit commander ordered to destroy everyone. But at that moment, a cannon shot rang out. The rabbit commander never expected this. Richard's army entered the battle. Now it was their turn. They attacked with their new weapons. The rabbits realized that it was gnome reinforcements. The barbarians received orders to go on the attack and eliminate the enemies. The young lord took his sword and began to fight. Gunther was next to him. Russell also fought shoulder to shoulder with them. These rabbits are strong and there are a lot of them, but a little less than half had already been defeated. It was very risky to advance further, because at some time bearmen might appear on this battlefield. And that's how it happened. This moment was not long in coming. The earth began to shake and no one understood what was happening. It was only when the bearmen were a little closer that the young lord was able to see them. Now the main target of the bearmen was the lord himself. The bear people were very angry and determined to go to the end. The first of the bearmen began to attack the young boss. Richard was a little alarmed and frightened by such a sudden appearance. The lord managed to block the first blow, but the second one almost failed. The bear people truly possessed enormous power. All the bearmen had already received the order to attack, and they were advancing. They and the rabbits became a joint group and began to go into battle. Each of them received orders to destroy their enemies. The centaurs received the order to shoot. The arrows hit the target accurately, and the new weapons worked well. The reserve team of rabbits climbed out of the water and also began to attack. They moved in a huge company towards the dwarf fortress and were already almost under it. It looks like the shaman's help is now needed. She conjured a fireball using magic words. The power of the fireball was already starting to help a little. This angered the bear people because they considered the use of fire magic to be an unfair battle. The troll shaman learned to make his body as strong as armor, and that's why now swords and arrows were breaking against him. This was a great help in battle. Troll magicians have become even stronger since the Lord tested their strength. The dwarven patriarch watched the battle from the heights of his fortress. His servant, like him, did not know what kind of strong people came to their aid. They knew the patriarch of the dwarves, Laubi. He believed that it was the blacksmith god who sent them to help. A dwarf from the squad joined them and demanded a request for command and for his squad to join his saviors for help. But the patriarch refused. He believed that this was not necessary. He replied that this dwarf squad of his should be engaged in saving his people. Let others fight. The commanders of the rabbits and bearmen ordered their warriors to gather their strength. Now they must find out how powerful the young lord is. He decided to finally use the system. The bearmen were shocked. They had no idea that the lord had such power. This was a diversion. And in the meantime, the lord ordered all his soldiers to attack quickly. But the bear people were not so stupid. Richard again entered into battle with one of them. These animals were not so easy to defeat. The Lord's system successfully activated heavenly power. As an addition, she also activated immense heavenly power. And also his speed was added to all this. The bearman felt an incomprehensible burning sensation throughout his body. The young boss sent him to the next world. For this, he received 30 experience points and 2,000 diners, and all thanks to the system. The trolls also learned to open fire chakras. Now they could breathe it. This also helped well in battle. Gunther also fought the bearman. Let him taste her blade. But he repelled her attack and knocked the sword out of her hands. He swung at her. She closed her eyes in confusion. And at that moment, someone pushed her away. Russell rushed to her aid. He threw his axe at the bear, but he easily repulsed him and laughed at this pathetic attempt. He instantly paid for his words. Richard didn't expect that invisibility would actually be so useful. For eliminating this bear man, he was given 70 diners and 100 experience points. Everyone rushed to Gunther and asked her if she was okay. But everything was fine with her. It turns out that the stone skin technique saved her. It seems that the troll's invisibility and stone skin can be transferred to others. Gunther was glad that now another crushing victory was theirs. But that was not all. Suddenly, the field strewn with the corpses of enemies was covered with pink fog. All the corpses began to come to life again. Even the shaman could not understand what was happening to them. It was a berserker spell. The Crescent Moon tribe came to the aid of the enemies, and the Minotaurs must have joined too. Yugosmel, Empire of Pompey. A little about the life of the Minotaurs tribe. They rely entirely on the magical power of their powerful shaman, Minotaeus. This witchcraft drives them into madness. Thanks to this power, they turn into fierce and invincible warriors on the battlefield. And for their cruelty in the heat of battle, the Minotaurs were nicknamed the Bloody Hoof Tribe. Meanwhile, the dead attacked. It was a terrible sight. They must now be stronger than before. The young lord asked the others if anyone saw Minotaeus cast the spell. The enemies are not completely mad. Apparently he cast the spell from a distance. That's it. The lord's warriors had nothing to worry about. These soldiers are not Gunther's opponents at all. They've already lost. The barbarians were also not weak. They quickly defeated the dead. Richard ordered those lying down not to be killed. There was no need to pursue deserters either. All that was required of the boss's people was to help the gnomes protect the fortress from the raid of the bearmen. For this, they will receive iron ore as a reward from them. The lord encouraged everyone to come with him to meet their new companions, the gnomes. But the dwarves asked them to stop at the very door of the fortress. They asked why these people came to them. The young lord introduced himself and said that he and Miss Annie from the Voya Trading Company had come to help the dwarves fight the raiders. It seems Annie knew Laubi personally. The dwarf recognized her but did not believe his eyes. Laubi apologized for being too suspicious. He invited her and her followers to enter the fortress. Annie replied that it was nothing and introduced the Lord to him. She also said that he was here to help. And Richard was offended that the dwarf called him a follower, his almighty lord. It's the same if he called Labi Shabi. The dwarf believed that it was only thanks to their blacksmith god that they were able to withstand this battle. He called Miss Annie to go and talk inside. He should thank the Lord for his victory, not some blacksmith god. The dwarf said that he did not expect Miss Annie at such a time. But as soon as she and the Lord learned that the bearmen had attacked them, they thought that the dwarves could not stand against them and immediately rushed to their aid. Labi agreed with her. They really couldn't handle them alone. After these words, Richard let out a short sneer. The dwarf asked him if he was mocking, but he replied that no, and it seemed to him. Annie asked Labi not to be angry, because the Lord was a famous warrior from the Pompey Empire. Out of good intentions, he came to the aid of the dwarven fortress. The dwarf asked the boss about his spiritual power, which should be at a high level. But the boss said that he was not developing spiritual power. But the gnome couldn't figure out how he didn't develop spiritual power. Then how could he call himself a knight? But it was his companion who called him a knight, not himself. The danger has not yet been eliminated. Annie asked the gnome what he would do next. The bearmen will surely attack again. The dwarf considered it necessary to rest now first. Well, in that case, Richard asked Labi to give him and his men a place to rest. The city is full of empty stone houses. Labi allowed them to be used at his discretion. Annie noticed that the dwarf was rude in communication, so she asked the Lord not to take it to heart. And he replied that she should not worry. He's not as petty as this gnome. This gnome is not usually like this. The battle changed him. The Lord thought that he was not suitable for the role of patriarch. Whining only harms your fighting spirit. Annie said the boss was too cruel. Not everyone is as fearless as him. Some are afraid of war. He asked if it was true. All people are afraid of war and death, and only by making the enemy fear even more is it possible to win. The Lord asked her to take a good rest today. The knight promised to be quiet. The dwarf guards bandaged their wounds and inquired about each other's well-being. The dwarf observer asked everyone to be quiet. It's better not to disturb the orcs and monsters again. In the room, Richard asked Heather if she was sleeping, but she, like him, could not sleep all night. In stone houses, the ceilings were too low, and she felt uncomfortable, so it would be better if she stayed to sleep on the street. Suddenly, the house began to shake. Heather did not understand what it could be. There must be an earthquake. The Lord didn't like that this building was shaking too much. Did the dwarves really make it out of shit and sticks? It was not an earthquake. Then where did this vibration come from? Heather was afraid that these could be enemies. And she was right. It was the bearmen who came along with the minotaurs. The dwarves sounded the alarm. They reported that the bearmen and minotaurs were almost near the fortress. They needed to quickly prepare for the attack. The dwarves were surprised that people from the Pompey Empire were already in position so quickly. Richard didn't expect the dwarves to come either. Since the minotaurs and other creatures came to their fortress as a whole pack, the dwarves will fight without sparing their lives. The Lord said that this time Minotaeus also came with this pack. How was the dwarf going to fight him? The Bullhead tribe is very impulsive. The dwarves were going to lure them into a trap, and then attack them in a crowd. In addition, minotaurs are too tall, so they will have to bend down to attack the gnomes. Labi decided that the Pompeians would be their reserve army. They, the gnomes, will try to hold back their onslaught. These halflings are so generous. Gunther laughed at that and turned to Heather to say that she was too tall and she shouldn't fight today. And Heather answered her with a laugh that Gunther was not little either. It started to rain from the sky. If the minotaurs destroy the wall fortress, then the gnomes are dead. Minotaurs are too ferocious, and that's why this can happen. The gnome commander ordered not to talk nonsense, but to quickly get to work. There really were too many bear lovers and minotaurs, and they are all very strong. Richard told Gunther that after a while he would see if he could take a few prisoners and sell them for rent. They could fetch a lot of money. However, taming them will not be easy. The dwarves didn't understand what they were talking about at all, and the commander of the dwarves thought that they were completely crazy. The dwarf turned to the boss, saying he could attack with huge artillery, and he replied that last time it worked only because the enemies did not expect it. The dwarf commander's name was Sendak. The patriarch asked him how many arrows they had left for crossbows, and he replied that there were only 6. 6 was catastrophically few. They must shoot all the minotaurs, the only way there was at least some chance of salvation. Meanwhile, below, the dwarves advanced on the minotaurs and bearmen, but the bear people were somehow different, too strong and fierce. The minotaurs were not inferior to them either. The dwarf archers have already prepared their crossbows and loaded their arrows. Sendak commanded the entire process and waited for the enemies to come closer. The bearmen have already defeated some of the warriors. The dwarven commander ordered to shoot. The arrows flew. Almost all the arrows hit the target, but those minotaurs who remained alive became even more angry. They rushed to attack and killed many. The bearmen walked right behind them. Sendak thought it was the end. Gunther saw that the dwarves were not coping, so she asked the boss what they would do. These crazy minotaurs are tough opponents. The young lord asked where his squad of magicians was, and where did Modil herself go. Gunther explained that she took advantage of the opportunity and tried to escape, but was caught. The barbarians watched her, and the shaman screamed to be released. The lord was angry with her. There is such a strong enemy in front of them, and she decided to run away. She knew that the dwarves could not defeat them. She was scared. Minotaeus owns madness magic, and Modil bloodthirst magic. Richard didn't understand why she was afraid. Hearing this, the dwarven commander asked the boss to quickly force her to use this spell. She tried to escape before the battle began, so she owed a favor. He ordered her to use the bloodthirst spell on the minotaurs and to do it as quickly as possible. The dwarf couldn't believe his ears. The boss wanted to enchant the minotaurs. Model didn't expect this either. The lord asked her to do as he says again, and she listened to him. What will happen to the minotaur if you add a bloodthirstiness spell to the madness spell, increasing its combat power several times over? I wonder if this could reduce the level of insanity. Everyone who heard this idea thought that Richard was crazy. He ordered the shaman not to stop and cast the spell faster. She spoke the right words faster, and finally it had to work. Magic condensed over the heads of the enemies, and she moved into their bodies. Something wrong began to happen to them. The dwarves were scared. They didn't know what it meant to them. Something was still changing in the minotaurs' bodies. Strength and growth began to grow. The dwarves decided to flee. The dwarven commander and the patriarch were very frightened. Modil was also scared. She still believed that the boss was crazy and that it was definitely the end for them all. He grabbed her by the scruff of the neck and asked her to open her puppy eyes and watch carefully what would happen now. The new force has already finally adapted to the body of the bullheads. The more strength he has, the greater the load on the heart. The power of madness and bloodlust strengthened the minotaur's physical strength. However, this increased the load on the cardiovascular system several times. And when this load exceeds the permissible limit, this enormous power will destroy its owner. And so it happened. This was a brilliant decision. Gunther was shocked. For this, the system added 600 experience points and 800 gold coins to the lord. Modil and the dwarf could not understand how this was possible. All minotaurs were defeated. The patriarch asked again how this was possible. Everything in this world obeys certain rules. Although minotaurs are good in battle, they also have their limits. Thanks to magic, the minotaurs became so strong that their hearts could not withstand such pressure. So we can say that the bloodthirstiness spell only finished off these thugs. The dwarf commander finally realized that the magical forces overwhelmed the bodies of the minotaurs so much that they simply tore them apart from the inside. In short, the dwarves and the lord's men defeated them with a strength of which they were proud. The young lord came up with this method when he saw minotaurs kneeling, unable to withstand the forces of madness. The dwarf praised him for such an incredible mind. A great strength often becomes a great weakness. But it was Modil who cast the spell. The boss told her that she was working off a debt for trying to escape. She really hoped to take credit for other people's achievements. She still doesn't agree with something. She imagined herself to be a cool shaman with extensive combat experience. She wanted to run away when meeting a strong opponent, and when she saw victory, she decided to appropriate someone else's glory for herself. The boss told her directly that such an experience was worse than nothing. In the future, the high mountain fortress will certainly reach a high level, but its combat experience gained in battles with primitive wild tribes is simply useless. Painted canvas is less suitable for painting than white paper. Going down, the dwarf asked if all the minotaurs had died. Internal bleeding should have killed them. What a pity. The lord wanted to sell a couple for the battle arena. The Medvdemen and minotaurs fell one after another. Now the enemies will probably calm down for a couple of days. However, after the calm there is always a storm. It is obvious that now the dwarven castle is still in danger. Richard asked about the arrows, whether they were really forged from iron, which the dwarves mined in their mine. The dwarf confirmed and said that crossbows too. With the system, it was not scary if this battle continued, and iron ore will sooner or later be the boss. But they will still have to help the dwarves with their difficulties. The lord warned Lobby that he needed to forge as many crossbows and arrows as possible. They would be useful in future battles. Of course, you can make arrows, but crossbows, it's a little difficult with them. Lobby wanted to show the lord something, so he invited him along. They went to the rifle tower. It was quite low even for Richard. The dwarves simply did not think that people would ever help them. Lobby brought him to show him the new crossbow they were building. He removed the cloth covering the weapon. The gnome asked to look at this miracle. The young lord at first did not believe that they had done this and asked him about it. Well, of course they did. They had several bronze engravings lying around, on which remained the secret of creating such crossbows. The dwarves simply followed those instructions. The boss asked what the range of the crossbow was. This little guy is capable of hitting an enemy at a distance of 500 to 800 steps. Richard offered him a telescope, asking if they used that scope, the crossbow would be able to shoot much further. The crossfire power of 3 of these crossbows will be simply incredible. The boss didn't even know who could resist them. The dwarf did not know what to answer. After all, in fact, the problem was not at all the range of the crossbow. Now the problem was the bowstring. The boss asked him about the bowstring. The tension from using an all-metal crossbow is too strong. So the ram's wool bowstring that the dwarves used before simply cannot withstand it and breaks. The patriarch wanted to try to make a bowstring from a giant Monica leech, but unfortunately, he was never able to buy one. This means that the dwarves have the wrong bowstrings. Now it is clear why the dwarves did not use these weapons in battles. Monica leeches are very rare, elastic, and incredibly durable. If these leeches are dried and processed, then it is possible to make a very strong bowstring from them. These Monica leeches were a challenge even for a lord. Meanwhile, the boss asked Lobby if he had any gold. The dwarf thought that Brother Richard could sell him several of these leeches. But he didn't have leeches and he apologized for that. The dwarf's nature was overly judgmental, and therefore, in his head, the dwarf had already scolded the lord 100 times for such questions. Centaurs use the veins of the Komodo dragon as strings for their bows. If you twist several of these into one, it can replace a Monica leech bowstring. But the lord had a ball in his pockets, so he could do nothing to help. But this idea was very interesting. The dwarf said that previously the dwarves sold ore and furs, so money is not a problem for them. If this is true, then the boss asked to carry everything that the dwarves have. The dwarves asked why the patriarch needed so much gold. Sendak replied that the patriarch had said that he was going to buy a string for a steel crossbow from Lord Richard. The dwarves believed that this Pompeii was not as simple as it seemed. They are more than sure that he is helping them not at all out of noble motives, but solely for the sake of achieving his goals. You can't fool the gnomes. Sendak replied that the lord was still helping. Dwarves must remember that the shadow of failure is still not far away. And the commander also believed that Richard could be their last hope for victory in this war. The dwarves understood this too. Besides, there is no one in their clan who could be stronger than the boss. The patriarch bought a bowstring and the dwarves began to test it. Observing this, the patriarch turned to Brother Richard. If too many enemies attack them, that bowstring won't last that long. Richard asked him if he was afraid of losing, but that was not the point at all. He was not afraid of losing. What was scary was that they had been fighting for half a month. Most of the dwarves from this fortress were wounded or killed. They can't stand another defeat. Well, to be honest, the lord has smarter tactics for this battle. Mr. asked him about this tactic, what exactly it was. The cause of this war was the iron ore that the dwarves protect. Richard suggested that they could now retreat and leave Lake Bayou to their enemies. After this, you should wait until the tribes begin to fight for him in this territory, and then they will simply finish off the remaining ones. But the patriarch was against it. He could not give Lake Bayou. But the lord did not understand why exactly this was not possible. In fact, the dwarves guarded more than just iron ore. That is, there is something else very important. Are they really hiding something at the bottom of the lake? While everyone else considers this lake just good territory, is there really some kind of secret there? This was the most important secret of the dwarves. The patriarch was categorically against disclosing it to complete strangers. But this secret, which is important to the dwarves, may not be so important to others. Another elder believed that Lord Pompey was not a naive kid at all. He needed good reasons to help. This elder's name was Reno. Another elder agreed with him. The dwarves should not trust this Pompeian. In some ways, Sendak was right. Without the help of the lord, this castle would have fallen under the onslaught of rabbits, bearmen, and minotaurs. Some of the dwarves agreed with his words. The Pompeians really did everything to help the dwarves survive this battle. But getting help from them and revealing an important secret are two different things. No matter how hard you try, no one will convince Reno. Sendak called on all the elders to listen to him. After all, this war is not over yet, and the dwarves must clearly understand that help is needed more than ever. The dwarves can still be defeated. Now their clan is unable to withstand the onslaught of enemies. Therefore, Sendak feared that Brother Richard was their last hope. And at this point, the meeting was over. In parallel with this event, troll magicians were training in the forest near the river. The first troll trained new combat techniques, and the second one practiced old skills. The weather was good, so everyone trained. After observing this, the boss didn't like that Modil trained them for so long for such meager achievements. Annie asked him not to worry. Even if these techniques seem useless now, perhaps they will definitely come in handy in the future. She was right. He had previously called Stone Skin useless. Soldiers of the High Mountain Fortress must be able to cast powerful spells. He asked the shaman to train even harder. The dwarves made a decision, and Sendak came to take Richard to the others. They entered some kind of cave. Richard didn't know where he was taken, but they were underwater. This secret that was at the bottom of the lake was bound with chains. It was legendary. Titanium. These gnomes are by no means ordinary guys. They used iron ore as a cover to keep this titan a secret. The titan was still breathing, which meant it was alive. He opened his eyes. It was simply incredible that he really felt their presence. After that, they climbed back to the shore. At first, Richard thought that they were hiding a gold mine there, but he never expected that there would be titanium there. Sendak said that when they began to mine ore at the bottom of the lake, they discovered a split there. They themselves did not expect that titanium would be hidden inside, but the Lord still did not understand why they were trying so hard to hide this titan. This is an unusual titan. He is the ancestor of the dwarf clan. It was funny, how can this even happen? Such a giant ancestor also has such short-legged relatives. The commander asked him if he saw how his eyes glowed. He noticed, but they stopped glowing as soon as they left. The dwarf asked him to remember again. The titan's soul senses the blood of the dwarves, so his eyes begin to shine. The same blood flowed in their veins. This titan is the god of all dwarves. Titans are ancient magical creatures. In legends, their height exceeded even dragons. At a time when chaos reigned on Earth, they personified strength itself. The Titans, possessing the magic of creation, were the only rulers of the Earth. However, all beings were subject to the law of life and death. Over time, it became more and more difficult for the Titans to survive. And so, in the end, they disappeared from our world. The Lord wondered why they didn't just run away with this Titan. It's not a problem for them to get through the mountains, but it wasn't that simple. The local iron ore forms a special magical field that holds the spiritual power of the ancestor. If he left this place, his spiritual power would simply dissipate. But where did they get this from, because there was no evidence? No one knew for sure whether this iron ore could close his spiritual power. Lord made a mistake. There is evidence. Previously, the light that the Titan's eyes emitted was much stronger. But when the dwarves began mining iron ore, it weakened significantly. Therefore, recently the gnomes forbade their fellow tribesmen to mine iron ore. That's it, the boss asked. They are going to guard the Titan until his death. Not to that extent. The dwarves noticed that during the full moon, the power of the Titan's soul activated by itself. During this period, he does not need anyone to be nearby. And during the full moon, this power is much stronger than at normal times. The dwarves believed that it was during the full moon that the power of titanium could be stimulated. The gnomes also have ancient books that say that this power can be inherited. And if they adopt it, then there will be no enemy. It would be worth fearing. Do they really want to inherit the power of his soul? True, but all attempts were unsuccessful. He and Elder Renault calculated that tomorrow night would be the fullest moon in a century. The power of the Titan can be adopted by casting the necessary spell that night. Now it's clear why the gnomes protect this lake so much. But why did they tell him all this? Were they really afraid that he started all this to steal the power of the soul? It's not so scary if the power of a Titan falls into the hands of a lord. The scary thing is that it will not be passed on to anyone and will simply sink into oblivion. They discussed at the Council of Elders that if none of the dwarves succeeded in inheriting this power, then they would allow the Lord to try. But this is probably a joke. The dwarves tried so many times and it didn't work, and now they want people to find problems on their butts. But this is not at all necessary. Reno believed that the boss could succeed if he has enough physical strength. Soul and body complement each other. He thought that dwarves, as blood relatives, had a better chance of success. It's time for them to return. If they're gone for too long, the others might suspect something. The dwarves asked the boss to help them keep this secret, especially without Miss Annie knowing. The Lord asked the gnome not to worry. He definitely wouldn't tell her anything. But they must return as quickly as possible, otherwise she may become suspicious. Gunther saw the boss wet and asked where he went and why he looked like that. He lied that he accidentally fell into the lake. The boss asked her to bring a towel. When she returned, the Lord asked her where everyone else was. She said that Miss Annie went to watch Modal train the trolls, and Heather and several centaurs went with her for company. Richard hoped that the dwarves would be safe until someone inherited the Titan's power. Heather rushed to the dwarf fortress. She had some pretty bad news. The young lord asked what happened. The fact was that the enemy army was moving straight towards the fortress, about 70 miles left. It was very bad timing, but only Veresk knew approximately how many there were. She replied that there were approximately 4,000 or 5,000 of them, and they won't stop until they reach their goal. Richard was afraid that there would be another battle tomorrow on the night of the full moon. The night was not for sleep. Early in the morning, the dwarves called their entire army to the foot of the fortress. They very quickly loaded crossbows with arrows. They also managed to prepare a lot of important things for the battle. These were shields. May Hephaestus bless them. They are ready to fight. The enemy saw all the armies in full assembly through a telescope. They tried to resist, like wild animals driven into a corner. The enemies planned to destroy the dwarven fortress before sunset. All enemies were preparing for battle. They were given orders to attack and spare no one. The Patriarch was clearly not ready to fight so soon if it were possible to postpone this battle even one day ago. If someone from their tribe could inherit the power of a Titan, they would not have to fight. Lord Richard came to calm Lobby. He told him that now was not the time for regrets and the defense of the fortress was entirely his responsibility. The leader of the bear lovers came to this battle in person. He ordered these little guys to be ground into dust. He gathered many for this battle. The enemy attacked, so the dwarves prepared to attack. The enemies were already approaching. The time has come. The young boss ordered the crossbows to be prepared. The arrows flew towards their intended targets. The centaurs also attacked with arrows below. Many arrows hit the target. The enemies were already almost at the doors of the fortress. Model and the trolls cast spells that caused fireballs. This was a good initial tactic. She acted a little. There were many explosions. The bear men attacked the gnomes. The minotaurs weren't far behind either. Richard and his captured jackals advanced. The giants were left to the lord. He was more capable of this. He was the first to attack. Now he managed to save Russell from the clutches of the bearmen. The leader of the bear lovers sent his brother to deal with the boy. He attacked hard and sharply. The lord was almost unable to cope with his powerful attack. Gunther saw this and began to worry very much about her boss. Now he was being attacked by the leader, who was also the king of the bear people. It's not for nothing that he received such a nickname. Richard couldn't remember the last time he could have been hurt. Now the king of the bearmen intends to take his life. Did this beast really want to die early? The lord destroyed everyone in his path. The sky was thickening with clouds. Many of the enemies died, but there were casualties among our own. Blood flowed like a river. Those who remained seemed to have gone mad. The boss's warriors could not defeat them. This was a problem. The boss decided to look into the system. System notification. Many of the barbarians were killed. Some were seriously injured. Gunther and Russell received minor injuries. This was the first time that a high mountain fortress had lost so many people. It was unthinkable. This was not in the plans and no one expected it. The enemies are so strong that conventional tactics do not help. This crazy herd, not sparing their own lives, rushes ahead. The almighty lord called Heather to him. He asked her to tell Gunther to cover his group with a volley of arrows as they retreat back to the dwarves' fortress. The rain stopped falling. Meanwhile, in the dwarf fortress, those who suffered were treated. They were in great pain. They asked for salvation. And the patriarch sat next to his faithful comrade. He could not believe that his best commander, Sendak, had died. Richard saw his tears and shouted at him. After all, they are now in a very difficult situation, and he managed to find time to cry. Laubi is a patriarch. Now he must pull himself together and call on his brothers to defend their fortress at any cost. You can't give up now. Laubi tried to pull himself together because all was not lost, and he must lead his people to victory. At this time, the Lord, standing over the commander's body, wished him to rest in peace. Annie asked the Lord about the situation. The assault on the city began. The elves have excellent hearing, so Annie should have heard the sounds of battle coming from outside. There were more and more enemies. They tried to get in by knocking down the doors. The troll cast a petrification spell on the doors. Everyone else leaned on the door to make it stand tighter. At the same time, enemies attacked the walls of the fortress. No one noticed this and they managed to get inside. The dwarf managed to report this. He ordered everyone else to run. But the enemy did not think that anyone would be able to get out alive. The shaman reported to the Lord that things had completely taken a bad turn. Enemy soldiers have made their way inside and are attacking the dwarves. Richard didn't expect it to happen so quickly. He got angry at her and the troll because they came back instead of shooting them down with fireballs. But the rain was too heavy. The fireballs would be of no use. The Lord got even more angry. He asked where Gunther and Heather were. And below, the enemies had already used magic and knocked down the doors with their ball. Gunther understood that this was definitely the end. The boss quickly came down to her and asked about her well-being. She was safe. Even the petrification technique could not help restrain the enemy warriors. The Lord asked Laubi about the number of people that remained. But there are less than 100 left, which is catastrophically small. That is, each of those who remained alive must defeat at least 100 opponents. Each one has 100. Not everyone can handle it. But you need to try to defeat at least half of the enemy army. First, we had to separate them. And then everyone joins the fight together. Gunther fought like it was the last time. Richard didn't lag behind either. They defeated 3 or 4 enemies with one swing of the sword. The king of the bearmen ordered his men to first deal with the Pompeian and then with the rest. The enemies were advancing. There were a lot of them. It's time to use the Lord system. This helped a little. Gunther thought it was a cool skill. Today he will let them all see the Lord's true strength. The dwarves could not cope with the enemy offensive. The bearman did not fall on the patriarch. Gunther informed the Lord that the dwarves seemed unable to cope. He couldn't believe it. He didn't count on it. The boss shouted for Medill to use the bloodlust technique. He asked her to cast much faster. There shouldn't be any mistakes. She did it. The gnomes came to life. The Lord asked this enchanted squad to use all their powers without reserve. The troll mage shared his stone armor with them. The commander of the rabbit squad ordered his men to eliminate everyone. They fought, but it seems the dwarves have become much stronger than before. The rabbits did not expect such a powerful force. The dead no longer had that fatigue and that hopelessness. They were deprived of any feelings. They fought for the last time. The rabbits gradually lost this battle. They did not have so much strength to cope with the dwarves. They were defeated. Someone watched this fight through a telescope. The king of the bearmen ordered the commander of the Ramen to join this battle as well. They called their group and moved into battle. The Lord ordered the troll magician to cut off their path. He read some kind of spell and hit the ground with all his might. Huge tree roots began to grow from underground. The Ram people did not understand what had happened. These roots grew on all four sides, covering the dwarven fortress. The enemies saw that the road was blocked. The king of the bearmen was very angry that the boy was so cunning. The Lord was glad that this helped at least a little, and the king of the bearmen was left alone. The troll magician who could become invisible was called Ha. Richard asked him to use his disappearing skill. Both of them and the boss are now invisible. They made their way through the roots to the other side. The Lord's plan was as simple as possible. He wanted to get to the king, and he succeeded. At this moment, the life of the Bearmen King came to an end. The Almighty Lord executed him. This was unexpected. Richard managed to defeat the king, now the others are easier to deal with. Everyone who was on the king's side began to realize that they had already lost. The news reached everyone that the king of the Bearmen had died. As expected, after this news the enemies began to flee. The Lord's men could not let these scoundrels go so easily. Arrows were fired from crossbows from the fortress, and the barbarians caught up with them below. As soon as the leader fell, they took off running like rats. This was disgusting for the Lord. Those who managed to escape escaped, but it is not clear whether they will return with help again. It was deep night, it was calm, but there was sadness in the hearts of the dwarves, and they were not at all happy about the victory. Many brave warriors fell in this fierce battle. The dwarf clan and the Highland fortress paid with the blood of their people to protect this fortress and its secret. However, for the Almighty Lord, this battle turned out to be very fruitful. He opened the system. Many of the soldiers received promotions. The high mountain fortress has been taken to a new level. Lobby came to the Lord to wish him good night. The Lord noticed that Lobby was well dressed and asked him where they were going for the night. Reno reminded that today is the night of the full moon. The dwarves were going to hold a ceremony for inheriting the power of a titan. The boss remembered this. Because of this difficult battle, this important event completely slipped out of his mind. Although the dwarves only survived such a terrible battle, such a chance as tonight is extremely rare. They have selected the strongest fighters and are ready to try again. That night was the fullest moon this century. Lobby hoped that luck would bless them this time, and they will finally be able to inherit the power of titanium. Everyone gathered at the appointed place and prepared to go to the bottom of the lake. The ritual of transferring the Titan's powers will take a lot of time, so first the spellcasters must drain the lake. Everyone who was there had to cast a special spell. The gnomes began to repeat the necessary magic words. Those who were waiting on the shore saw that the water was beginning to behave strangely. The water begins to disappear and titanium is visible from it. It was not a difficult job. The dwarves climbed onto land. Everything is ready. The inheritance ceremony can begin. Candidates were asked to proceed. Each one took turns approaching the Titan. Richard thought what they were doing was wrong, because it looked like they were scattering flies. He turned to Modil and asked her how trustworthy this method of inheritance was, and she replied that there was nothing like that. It was just a ritual for good luck. It's a useless thing. Well, the shaman did not personally see this, but among other shamans they say that the experience of the older generation can be conveyed through dance. The boss thought it was bullshit. If shamans had such good technique, would they then have to work on their techniques to raise their skills? Of course, it is impossible to inherit everything, half at most. The Lord asked her if there was any point in this. If the dwarves managed to gain even 10% of the strength of their ancestor, then this should not be enough to never fight in battle again. The moment has come to blow the huge horn. The dwarves lit a circle of fire on the coast. Each candidate must step into the middle and use their blood connection to call upon the great Titan. The boss asked Modil if it was dangerous. There is such a thing after all. The power of a Titan is not easy to squeeze into the body of a dwarf. If the body is too weak, then you can simply explode. Richard thought it was good that he was not one of the candidates. The first gnome in the circle of fire did everything that was required and now just waited. But nothing happened. The next dwarf candidate took his place, and it didn't work out for him, and the next one didn't work out either. The fourth candidate was also unlucky. Lobby was upset that all the candidates failed. No one is lucky. Reno walked closer to the Titan and knelt down. He asked the great Titan to take pity on his descendants. But the miracle did not happen. All the dwarves thought this was the end. Lobby, in desperation, suggested that his brother Richard try too. Well, he's not a gnome, so he didn't think that he could succeed. But Lobby asked him very much. Since the dwarf asked so, he agreed to try, but did not think that the great Titan would choose him. He stood in the center of the circle of fire and tried to remember everything that the dwarves did. And suddenly something happened. Richard looked up and saw the Titan move. What does it mean that a lord has dwarven blood? The great Titan has awakened again, after so many long centuries. The force was too powerful, and it seemed like there was a lot of it. Richard shouted to everyone to run. It seems that the great Titan could explode now. But Reno and Lobby stood their ground, and suddenly, out of nowhere, a creature appeared. The Titan came to life. There were already two of these creatures. The Lord did not understand what relation these creatures had to titanium. Was his soul reborn into this? The dwarves began to shout to the ancestor not to rush. He shouldn't have fallen and gotten hurt. It was a touching event. Modil suggested catching, frying, and eating them. Maybe this way the powers of the Titan will pass to them. The creatures began to jump on the Titan's body. For the gnomes, it was scary in case something bad happened to them. No wonder he's a descendant of the great Titan. The creature loved to stand up in front of everyone. The animal jumped out of the titanium, and he headed first to the troll magicians. The animal examined everyone present. Richard took the animal to him to look at it closer. He noticed membranes between his forearm and ribs. It must be thanks to them that he can float in the air. The dwarves asked him to quickly hand him over to them. Quite unexpectedly, the animal began to spew small lightning bolts. The Lord could imagine this happening. He quickly threw it to the dwarves and shouted to them to catch it. And at that moment, there was a small explosion. After that, the dwarves did not know what to say. Not bad. Who would have thought that the animal inherited the Titanic thunder technique? Lobby shouted to everyone to immediately look at the Titan. Something was happening to his body. Apparently, he completed his last mission. It's his time to return to Earth. Reno suggested calling the animal Choo Choo. It was an interesting name and suited him very well. It's time to head back home to the High Mountain Fortress. Annie was worried that Richard was in such a hurry to get back to the High Fortress, but they didn't even have time to discuss the terms of cooperation. He asked her not to worry about it. She would get her share as they agreed. This answer suited her, but she still felt like he was hiding something. She decided to ask him about this. Was he and the dwarves really not telling her something? The boss wanted to excuse himself by saying that it seemed to her, but the little animal gave him away. She saw him. In her opinion, he was very nice. Annie asked where he came from. The Lord began to explain that at first the dwarves wanted to raise him themselves. But as soon as the Lord left, the animal refused food and water, so the dwarves had to give it to him. He began to feed him and asked him to drink more slowly. A few days later, Richard and Annie arrived safely at the Highland Fortress. Annie then went back to the trade guild with the merchants, promising to send people as soon as possible to establish trade relations. But a few days later, still no sign of Annie. The young lord met with the head of the reserve, Sauron. Richard welcomed him to his homeland. Sauron noticed that the lord had become popular recently. All the bards of Colin sang his story. The boss decided to ask him whether my lord arrived intentionally or just passing through these parts. Sauron replied that he came to him on purpose, even for his sake. But why such formality? The lord did not understand. Frankly, he was surprised that he had come for him. After all, he was not interested in men. But my lord replied that he had not arrived in that sense. Sauron brought with him a rare delicacy and invited them to talk over food. Richard agreed. He brought teppanyaki squid. The lord was surprised that my lord considered this a great and rare delicacy. At this moment, the animal began to play around. Richard smiled at him, because he had come to bother him again. Choo Choo gave the owner a nut. The boss split it, and he ate it. And the animal was left with only a shell to play with. Sauron also thought he was cute. He also noticed that vibrations of elemental energy emanated from him. He thought it was a demonic beast and asked the owner about it. The lord explained that it was not a demonic beast, but a descendant of the Titans. The boss asked Chuchia to call the gnome cook, and as a reward he gave him nuts. The animal loved them very much, so he ate them right away. Richard said that despite the fact that this animal is so tiny, it inherited the purest essence of titanium. Sauron laughed, but let him believe it or not. By that time, the food was already ready and served to the table. If not for Sauron's permission, it is unlikely that the Lord's expedition would have gone so smoothly. He asked the Lord if he knew why exactly my Lord did this, but the boss isn't sure what he wanted to know because he's just trying to interest him. Sauron began to tell Richard that he should know that there had been two factions in Pompeii for many years. Are they really the same two factions? The first faction is the minions of the Holy Church of Light, who sleep and see that all power over Pompeii will pass into their hands. Another faction is the followers of the Ice Goddess who are at enmity with the Holy Church. At the moment, the Holy Church of Light is the main religion in the human world. Almost 1/3 of the countries on the continent have the prefix holy before their name. However, Pompeii is the northernmost human country on the continent, so many people believe in an ice goddess. In winter, various types of natural disasters occur in Pompeii, which contributes to the spread of this belief in the ice goddess. Richard decided to ask which of these factions his half-brother Wenger and this my lord belonged to. But they didn't believe in gods, so none of these factions interested them. They are magicians, so they considered themselves secular people, thereby maintaining neutrality. But the Lord noticed that magicians usually do not smoke. But in the hands of Sauron it was not tobacco, but powder from the brain of a giant beaver. Mages are physically weak and they often have to strain their brains. And this thing just helps him relieve his migraine. The boss didn't answer. After a moment's pause, he said that he also did not believe in gods. After all, there is no evidence that the gods ever came to this world. No one can make him believe what he himself has never seen. My lord Sauron has been watching over him for a long time. It's not often you meet unbelievers like them. He decided to help the Lord because rare species of people need protection more than others. But why did he think he needed help? It dawned on Richard that he was trying to drag him into a faction that was neutral. He decided to ask about it directly. My lord replied that there was some truth in his words, but let him not even think about it. The Lord categorically did not like this idea. When disputes begin, the neutral party has to fight both factions at once. Although it didn't sound very good, this thought was correct. Therefore, if one day they all really found themselves on the brink of war, Sauron suggested that he choose the Church of the Holy Light. The Lord was only interested in one question: why this particular faction? But Sauron asked him to look at the 3 coins of Pompeii, which he had already laid out on the table. 1 gold coin can be exchanged for 12 silver coins. 1 silver can be exchanged for 24 copper. They, people, have only 10 fingers on their hands. In fact, Pompeii could have changed this ratio to the easiest number to count, but they didn't. And why? Because the Ice Goddess only has 12 wings. After all, the Ice Goddess Church had too much influence. Richard has a good reputation, so why not take advantage of this little advantage? The Lord agreed with this. This is better than nothing. And besides, he owes my lord 1,000 gold pieces. Well, at the moment, 1,001 gold. But the gold coin jumped out of his hands and returned back to its place. My lord was about to leave, but the Lord was worried about whether he would really just leave like that. But what happened? Can't the boss digest everything he just heard? This was not entirely true. But in any case, he will act at his own discretion. My lord seemed to really think that he could just come to the high mountain fortress, wander around there and leave. Sauron heard that they were developing rapidly, so he put aside all his business to come and look at it in person. It's not a bad privilege to travel wherever you want. Yes, this is indeed a good privilege. But there was no reason to envy the privileges of an old trickster like Sauron. After all, a vast and beautiful world still awaits Richard, Lord Discoverer. Lord asked that Sauron really regrets that he did not do this alone. Now it's impossible to climb higher, and no one wants to be lower. But my lord never regretted it. He gave him a great example. He's actually allergic to giant beaver brain powder. As soon as you inhale, your throat immediately begins to itch. However, migraines are much more severe. Therefore, even when my lord complains of an itchy throat, he still realizes that this powder relieved him of an unbearable headache. This is called making a choice. The next day, the lord and Chiuchu were relaxing, sunbathing in the sun. The shaman disturbed them a little by telling them that Sister Annie had arrived. Looking at the new high mountain fortress, she gasped in surprise. It was built so quickly. She couldn't believe her eyes. Richard asked her if she really didn't recognize these places. This place has truly changed beyond recognition. It's all thanks to the trolls, Han and Ha. Recently, they have been regularly using fertility techniques, so the entire area is surrounded by flowers and herbs. Annie wanted to ask what the dwarves were doing in the high mountain fortress, but the Lord beat her to it. He said that almost all the dwarven warriors died in battle, and therefore gathering everyone together in this fortress was a very good decision. Annie wondered if they had made a secret deal with the dwarves. Richard said that they decided everything after she left. Well, not at some kind of secret meeting. Meanwhile, she also asked what he was doing here. Was he really just going to relax all day? But it seems that the Lord liked this idea most of all. He didn't even know how to answer her correctly. She should know that he is also a philanthropist. After the war, some races were left on the brink of death, and when they came to the threshold of the high mountain fortress, the Lord simply could not refuse them help. And in general, it was Modil's idea. She said that these people had no one to rely on, so the boss, out of good intentions, allowed them to stay and take on some responsibilities. Most likely, this was not her initiative at all. Annie had one more important matter to do with the Lord. She wanted to introduce him to the famous naturalist, Miss Buckland. Miss Bankland greeted her boss. Is it really the tigress herself? Miss Buckland comes from the very famous White Tiger clan. However, she is much better at art than fighting. Her nickname is Tang, so the Lord can address her as Tang Baihu. Tang means sugar and Baihu is short for White Tiger. Richard said that he was very glad to meet them. In his head, he noticed that Tang Baihu was consonant with Tang Bohu. This is a Chinese artist, calligrapher of the Ming dynasty. An interesting coincidence. Lord hoped that she would be able to fully carry out her naturalistic research. He hoped it wouldn't be a big deal if they didn't have much to see in the fortress. At lunchtime, Gunther told her boss that they were getting ready to hit the road. They will leave early and come back earlier. The Lord really hoped that they would be able to bring a couple of new barbarians with them. He asked them not to overdo it. She asked him not to worry again. After all, someday they will still be able to bring all their fellow tribesmen to this fortress. They said goodbye, and Gunther, Nat, and the others set off. After this, the Lord asked Annie to help him see if there were any high-grade books on cultivating the spiritual power of warriors on the market. She agreed, but warned him not to count on much. Usually you can't buy good books in a day. One of the dwarves joined the conversation. He needed to tell the boss something. He was suffering from a cold, so the Lord asked him to take good care of his condition and not overexert himself. The dwarf reported that they had finally finished building a new blast furnace, and the blacksmiths were preparing to open it. This was good news. Joining the dwarven clan in the high mountain fortress brought them many benefits. Blacksmiths and a lot of ore appeared. And also the wine industry of the high mountain fortress has reached a new level. It's so cool! After so many days, they finally have so many good weapons. Entering the room, Richard asked Gunther if she liked all this new equipment. She replied that it was simply gorgeous. She noticed some detail on him and decided to ask about it. She didn't know what it was or why it was needed. This was Lobby's special invention. You just had to press this button. This is the fast armor technology. This is quite modern. But the blacksmith called this weapon a little differently. Gunther asked how exactly. Titanium armor is its name. This name was more to Gunther's liking. Richard decided to try it on, but when he put it on, he discovered that he couldn't reach the button. Lobby had misjudged her location. Besides, he couldn't take it off on his own. I had to ask for help. Gunther was amused by the fact that it was called fast armor. After all, it's impossible to remove it yourself. She told Lobby that there were still problems with this. He should solve them quickly. A servant entered the room and reported that lizard people had come to the high mountain fortress. They wanted to see the Lord urgently. This seemed very strange to Gunther, so she asked the Lord for a spyglass. It seems that they have already come to these lands once. They had weapons, and Gunther suggested that they could delay them a little. The purpose of their visit remained unclear. The newcomer from the group of barbarians heard that the lizard people were passing through here, but the Lord still had no intention of hosting them. It is not known why they came, so they should have been arrested. But Heather was against it, saying that only fools would do this from the very beginning. The Tigress, on the contrary, believed that they were harmless and were on their way to Pompeii. But why do they need to go there? No one could yet answer this question. The Tigress said that His Majesty sagely many years ago began to assemble a powerful army from the beast races. Richard asked her what these tailed tourists might have to do with this. Annie warned not to underestimate them. This people of lizard people call themselves Psyker, but they also have another name, Dragon Tamers. This was a great shock for the Lord, but Annie explained that they are not real dragon tamers. It was about a beast similar to dragons, which is called the Dragon of the Psyker tribe. The boss reproached her for not telling this before. The Tigress said that the life of this people was special, starting from birth. Each lizard is born together with one dragon. Therefore, Dragon Tamers is not the most correct name. They were relatives, not an owner and a pet. The Lord asked who was in charge of their reproduction. But all the spirits of the lands are barren, so the main ones are definitely the Psyker people. Richard also wondered how much larger these land dragons were. Tigress needed a little time to think and remember. It turned out that the dragons were slightly smaller than the Lord's armadillo. In addition, they have artiodactyls, which is useful in combat. The Lord was filled with so many emotions, he ordered to act very quickly. His order was that Gunther should immediately bring these tourists to the high mountain fortress and provide everyone with an overnight stay. Tigress asked what he wanted to do next, but for now the Lord was just going to leave them in the fortress. She boldly suggested that he still hoped that the people who did not choose a king would choose him, a pioneer lord with an uncertain future. Gunther brought everyone and the Lord went out to meet them. It looks like the plan worked. The Lord allowed them to bring all their people to this fortress, and they would discuss matters later. The lizard leader agreed. Tigress was surprised that the lizards began to call Richard master. She asked him if everything had worked out. Well, it couldn't be otherwise, and he knew it. She began to suspect that the whole point was that the boss gave them some kind of potion. She asked him about it. After all, even young girls are harder to deceive. But there was no potion. He simply told them that he had magic herbs to increase strength, and that they could stay if they wanted. The lizards were so happy when they heard this, that they immediately agreed. Tigress didn't like it. She thought he was a fool. It was lunchtime and voices were heard from the gazebo. Richard and the trolls played cards. It seems the Lord was winning, but suddenly a glass of water shook on the table. The lizards have arrived. He called them his invincible team of dragon lords. He and the leaders of the other clans of this fortress came out to meet them. But Choo-Choo began to behave strangely. The animal hid in the Lord's jacket. Probably too much noise scared him. Gunther asked Heather if centaurs could resist lizards. Heather replied that they were so stupid that they could not defeat the centaurs. The boss watched through the telescope. He was very happy that his cavalry arrived so quickly. This is worthy of the name of the Great Lord's detachment. Annie thought it was a pity that the people of Psyker were so physically weak. They could use stronger riders. But they could easily change riders. But there is a blood connection, thanks to which trust is achieved between horse and rider. This was a small problem. There must be balance everywhere. If nature had given them greater strength, they would not have been such good horsemen. The Psychair people always have twins, but due to physical weakness, it is sometimes difficult for women to become pregnant and give birth to children. The lizard leader approached the Lord and greeted him. The lizards were happy to welcome their master. The leader's name was Abu. Richard introduced himself in response and welcomed him and the people to his lands. The Lord asked how they were in these lands. The lizard looked around and concluded that this was quite promising. The Lord warned that he would personally ensure that everyone gets the medicine he spoke about. Abu thanked him. The boss did not expect that there would also be dragons in the system. This is probably due to the fact that the Psychair people and their earthen dragons are blood relatives. After this medicine, both will begin to gain experience together. Tigress asked him about Annie telling her that he wanted to buy a book of light magic. He confirmed this and asked if she really had such a book. Of course she didn't have this book. Richard didn't understand why she asked this then. She asked him if he had heard of the art of sacred prayer. She would advise him to try. It seems that this art is connected with the strength of the voice, and compared with physical development, it is unlikely to be able to add even a little power to it. Many do not survive natural selection because they do not keep up with the times. So the Lord was not interested in this ancient thing. Annie also believed that the art of sacred prayer was a relic of the past. The tigress replied that today's youth grow up without brains and die without brains. She asked the Lord how hard he could punch. He thought for a moment and replied that he didn't remember exactly. He gathered all his strength into his fist, and he just hit it in front of him. The candle on the table went out. He estimated his strength to be somewhere around 2 tons. Tigress asked him if he knew what the effect of the art of sacred prayer was. He replied that he respected, of course, all her knowledge, but still did not understand what she was getting at and what she wanted to say by this. The effect of the art of sacred prayer is to increase strength, but he still didn't understand what this meant for him. But this strength was in proportion to all body parameters and abilities. Richard guessed that strength in proportion means that if you are strong, you will become stronger. If you are weak, you will become weaker. Additionally, practicing the art of sacred prayer increases resistance to dark magic. When she was young, the tigress came across him and very quickly mastered all the teachings. She handed the Lord some kind of package. It was a letter, and he immediately began to study its contents. It was written about a battle mage named Nero. 3,000 years ago, during the era of the Great Tide of Elements, it was extremely difficult to cast magic. Therefore, without relying on anything, the art of sacred prayer was created. Nero himself not only excelled in the art of sacred prayer, but could even practice dark and light magic in the magical realm itself. The Lord believed that this was absolutely impossible. Well, ancient scrolls don't last that long, so these are all just theories. If it's really just a theory, then there's no point in thinking about it that much. Tigress asked the Lord if she could serve as governor of the high mountain fortress. The boss agreed with this. If that's what she wants, then so be it. After all, now the high mountain fortress was experiencing stagnation, but such an educated woman could turn this outback into a beautiful place. She was glad that he finally understood this and approved of this idea. The high mountain fortress is ancient, full of vitality and with great prospects. Tigress had not felt this good for a very long time. She was happy in this place. Evening. The Lord sat in his room and looked at this letter. After reading in more detail, he learned that this art of sacred prayer has 5 levels of energy. Dawn spell, star twinkle, moonlight, sunlight, and daylight. The lowest rank is the dawn spell, applied once a day. The effect lasts about half an hour. What is most interesting is that it increases the power by half, and with each subsequent rank, the level and duration of the effect increases. Richard decided that enough of the theories, it was time to try it all in practice. He decided to start with the most basic, and when he succeeded, he raised his self-esteem quite well. The scroll said that it usually takes a month to learn the basics. If the feeling of warmth reaches the heart, then the spell has worked. And then he decided to try to use it before bed. Okay, he'll think about it tomorrow, but for now he decided to look at the troops in the system. Only when he opened it did the Lord see something impossible. It was amazing. Progress was going too fast. The boss thought that if this was the case, then it was worth trying to throw a few points into the skill. The Lord received these glasses quite a long time ago, but new ones are difficult. If the Lord continues to practice, the level will soon be gained very slowly. After thinking it over, he decided that he should not stop improving for a second. Richard wanted to increase the skill level to the very limit. He logged in again. He confirmed the points used for his skill. And suddenly I felt something. It was as if a little sun had appeared in his heart. This was the very power of light. He felt a surge of strength. Now he saw. All the details of his past appeared before his eyes. Richard felt that he could charge the air and change the density of water, as if nature itself from that moment was subject to him alone. It is not surprising that the tigress spoke so highly of this art. It would indeed be useful to the Lord. He decided to invest all the remaining points. When the boss told everyone about this, they were delighted that he was able to master the technique in one evening. Tigress praised the boss and said that he was really very smart and she was proud of him, and he thought that he would not hear praise from her. Everyone praised him and thought he was great. Veresk's breath was out of breath. It seemed to him that the tigress was silent this time. He hurried to her to tell her that the scroll she had given him. In general, he wants to keep it. She was glad that he read it so quickly and advised him not to delay in causing heat flows. Richard was upset that she didn't even praise him. He was already so tired of dealing with these managerial matters. The dwarf decided to ask the Lord about what they should do with the bronze weapon, which is still gathering dust in the warehouse. Tigress was surprised by this. She did not know about any bronze weapons. The Lord had forgotten that they had such a thing. Richard suddenly remembered the sword. Judging by the decoration, it dates back to the time of Nero's rebellion. It probably cost a lot of money. The tigress asked the Lord to take her with him. Gnome also decided to go. If there are more than a dozen bronze treasures in the warehouse, then most likely they will be sold quickly. There really was a lot of stuff in the warehouse. Seeing this hefty pile, Richard was horrified. This quantity figure is some kind of nonsense. A bird in the hand is worth two in the bush. Bronze is not some kind of rubbish, a high price. This is only evidence of its scarcity. The tigress picked up the sword and realized that this weapon was very well preserved. She tried it on her tongue. The smell of earth, an ancient mausoleum or an armory cannot help but please. She had only heard about this, but she did not expect that she would be able to experience this thing herself. It was great wealth that was mind-blowing. Richard asked the guards to call Modil. She knows the wilderness better. When they led her, she screamed and asked why they arrested her, because she had done nothing. But from now on, the Lord asks her, and she only answers. He asked her that when she lived in the tribe before, had she seen such bronze. Of course she saw her. He also asked where it was from, what time it was, and how many. She said that about 6 months ago, they were exchanged with their eastern neighbors. At that time, many tribes bought them because they were much cheaper than iron weapons. The boss was angry that she had not said such an important detail earlier. She didn't know why he needed this nonsense, so she didn't say anything. After all, the weapons they made themselves are much stronger than those broken pieces of iron and bronze. She's right, oddly enough. He thought Modil was ignorant, but it was not her fault. Richard looked at her. Without thinking twice, the Lord informed her that the organization had just decided to give her a difficult task. The boss offered to give her 10 fighters on the condition that she go and find out where all these things came from. Modil asked if she could refuse, but she couldn't ask that question. It is pointless. So, she nevertheless went with 10 warriors in search of the source of bronze. Fortunately, after several difficult battles, the famous golden sign, the Scarlet Castle, was erected near the Gaoshan fortress. As soon as Modil entered, countless natives began to flatter her and madly show their affection. And as a result, bronze items circulated publicly along the entire route. Soon Modil found the birthplace of the ruins. On the way back, the team size had already increased to hundreds of people. Looking through the telescope, Richard did not think that it was someone again trying to invade the high mountain fortress. They did not know their origins and from which tribe they all sneaked away. One day, one man handed out a sickle, and they all cut the grass so that he could feed the cows. Modil believed that the indicated place on the map was right under their feet. But there were hundreds of miles of land in this place. The Lord asked her to go and choose a reliable guide and bring dozens of people. The boss had to see the whole situation with his own eyes and understand it. When the time comes, they will sell it and exchange it for wheat beans, and he will return several hundred tons. These earthly dragons were even more terrible compared to the parasites. Their mouths are a bottomless pit. Before leaving, the Lord asked the shaman that before his arrival she should ensure good protection of the high mountain fortress. 1 week later, Annie noticed Richard and Heather returning home in the distance. Tigress welcomed him home and asked how he was doing. But if the boss gets down to business, there is nothing he cannot achieve. Annie warned that such a large number would certainly suppress the price of ancient weapons on the market. The tigress also asked where all the free people had gone. Richard thought there was a nice fresco on the wall, so he let them stay and figure out how to destroy it. But how was the Lord not afraid that something might happen to them? But he didn't think anyone would get bored enough to attack the Rabbit Man. At the same time, the massive leakage of bronze also attracted the attention of another legion, Hendra Gunavinduan, commander of the Brown Bear Roar Legion in the Stuart Kingdom. He walked this path for a long time, and finally he managed to find the ruins. Hendra Gunavinduan is from the Kingdom of Stuart, one of the 3 great states. As a kingdom comparable in power to Pompeii, Hendra is in the true sense an internal imperial marshal. Rich family, noble origin, bright future. The label of aristocrat suits someone like Hendra perfectly. Unfortunately, everything is far from so simple. After hard training with several of his brothers, only Hendra was sent to the border and became the commander of the Brown Bear Roar. However, the Stuart Kingdom has strict rules for naming armies, because the name alone is enough to understand a lot. Frontline Elite Army, named after natural disasters. For example, Storm Fury and Tremors. Second-level armies are named after powerful monsters. For example, Dragon Battle, Gryphon's Courage, Swift Hawk. bears, boars, elephants are common animals. This is how all the worst armies of the third line are called. It is no coincidence that Hendra, at 27 years old, will have no chance of promotion in the future. But this aristocrat is not one to give up so easily. When the bandits were suppressed a few months ago, Hendra accidentally discovered that they had quite a lot of ancient bronzes. So Hendra immediately began investigating. Finding its origin was not difficult. Having arrived at the right place, one of the aristocrat's guards asked if Hendra would like to first capture the living and beat the necessary information out of them by torture. But he refused and ordered to simply win. Then these people will tell everything themselves. He also ordered everyone to rest, eat, and go to bed. They should have prepared to attack after sunset. The fresco was too difficult. If the workers continue to chisel it so slowly, they are unlikely to ever finish it. These savages used to at least give advice, but now they just watch and have fun. The rabbit people decided to postpone all this trouble until tomorrow. They decided to go and rest as it was already getting dark. That's it. All the other workers agreed. One of the rabbits noticed that the second one was doing something strange and asked him about it. But it turned out that Freddy just wanted to relieve himself in a big way. Hendra's men attacked and destroyed everyone. The servants reported to him that the bronze had been found by chance. It was wonderful. But he asked why he still hasn't seen her. The servant reported that 3 days ago the Pompeian aristocrat had stepped ahead of them, and all the bronze had been replaced. Hendra asked who this man was. He was told that this was the Pompeian leader from the Alpine castle. These hillbillies described them as very powerful, like the coming of holy light. Hendra considered him just a little pioneer. The natives had no knowledge, so there was no point in taking it all to heart. However, he knew that the war was about to begin. If this is really the case and the Pompeians find out about it, then they will have big problems. Hendra agreed with this and seemed to accept that this problem would indeed be that big. But if the pioneer leader is destroyed, how long will it take to be discovered? The servant estimated that it would be about a month. If the griffins get rid of the corpses, then there will be more time. Or maybe it will never be discovered. Freddy is the only one who survived. He sat in the bushes and saw it all. High Mountain Fortress. The tigress said that the monarch of the Stuart kingdom was called Bellone, and he is a man with many ideas. Bellone appointed many ambitious boys as army commanders, and all these boys feel that they will once again be handed the banner, so they build armies from their own pockets. Here's the trick. Thanks to this, there will be a lot of gold coins in the treasury in a year. 100,000, at least 100,000 gold coins. There was so much money that year. Gunther wondered why Bellone had spent them. Bellone is known for his gluttony and lust, so naturally he spent all those coins on these things. Richard thought it was something else. At that moment, people came. Rabbits, and Freddy was with them. The Lord was horrified and asked what happened. He recognized this rabbit. He said that he brought important news. Someone was planning to attack Gaoshan Fortress. Tigress guessed that it was a legion of brown bears. A Stuart legion is usually about 4,000 strong, and the brown bear flag would be a garrison legion. There should be a maximum of 3,000 people, so the High Mountain Fortress did not need to worry so much. Richard was surprised that there were so many people in the legion. Isn't this a top-level unit? But compared to the total number of people, the most important thing is whether the other side has a magician with an army. Annie agreed. If the other party had any high-level magician, then he would not be able to play. On the contrary, the Lord only had an incompetent shaman and 2 trolls. Tigress tried to reassure him by saying that although high-level magicians are strong, their number has greatly decreased lately. Annie knew that His Majesty Bellone was very suspicious, and high-level magicians were only assigned to the army during wartime. And now it's still peacetime. It was a surprise for the Lord that in addition to financial literacy, the Tigress knew a lot of interesting and useful things. And Annie was surprised that the Lord didn't even know this. Of course, the voices of supporters and opponents are very loud, and everyone in all countries knows about it. Richard excused himself by saying that he practically didn't remember anything. This was about 20 years ago. He was not born yet, and therefore could not know this. Tigress suggested they get down to business. They didn't need to worry about the magician. All the same, other people's magicians are not as good as Modil and the trolls. Only 3,000 people, and the magician and the army are not yet visible. Richard decided that if he still dared to come with his army, they would never be able to leave. Tigress didn't understand why he was so sure. Even if they mobilize all their warriors, they still won't recruit that many. They have a maximum of 600 people. She was angry that with only 1/5 of the enemy's strength, he was going somewhere to gain the same number as theirs. Richard promised Annie that when the time came, all the loot would go into her hands. She agreed with this. But still Annie thought that the Lord would ask someone for help. But no, he believed that the great lords did not need anyone's help. The meeting ended. Soon, thousands of people throughout Gaoshan Fort began to take action in preparation for the coming war. The High Mountain Fort is located on the western side of the Biox River. To avoid losses and damage, Richard decided to locate the battlefield in the east. And for realism, Richard also ordered people to build a fake Lord's Hall on the east bank of the river, which would be attractive and authentic. The trolls used soil fertility techniques every day. Weeds and reeds grew quickly, forming a green city wall adjacent to the riverbank. And 20 days later, both sides finally entered into their first preliminary confrontation. After a round of careful analysis of the situation, both sides attacked each other. But no matter how good a scout's riding skills are, he is no match for a centaur's own legs. And the outcome will be decided in an instant. When the centaurs fought Heather, it seemed that there was some kind of heavy cavalry on the enemy side. Richard thought this was good. After all, her equipment is the most valuable. But they were too slow. In 20 days, only the Rangers reached the battlefield first. At this rate, it is estimated that it will take several more days to wait for their army to arrive. Hendra thought it was smart to use a centaur as a ranger. But this is a struggle just before death. When his army comes, they will definitely lose. 2 days later, the damned weeds got into the wheels, and because of them the speed decreased several times. But you can't leave them behind. Inside are 200-man teams of heavy cavalry, which are the key to the battle. Gunther spotted his army in the distance and reported it to the Lord. Well, I finally waited after all. Looking through the telescope, he noticed that 22 days later he received a group of defeated legions in such a wretched condition. Only the front half of the cavalry armor is iron, and the back is probably just leather. And this horse armor with a bare butt at the back. Richard was angry at this appearance. They thought they were going to hold an umbrella when it rains. If you already have money, then you could see how others have it. Richard just didn't look good. But Hendra wouldn't be able to intimidate him or his men. Surprisingly, those wearing armor and these big guys don't look like ordinary craftsmen. There is much more equipment and people than Hendra expected. He greatly underestimated them. His servant noticed healthy reeds a couple of miles from their army and reported this to the leader. This plant, which withers every year, has grown to 3 to 4 meters and is as lush as a grove. The servant suggested that behind these reeds there was an ambush. Muddy shallows will not allow horses and soldiers to gain the necessary speed and will make the raid impossible. Hendra ordered to prepare for attack. The swordsmen stepped forward to suppress. The infantry marched in formation. All the cavalry had to go around on all flanks. Everyone obeyed him. The swordsman commander ordered to shoot. The cavalry was lined up for the assault. Arrows flew at the Lord's men, but they were saved by their shields. Gunther could no longer stand idle. She told her boss about it. But he asked her to wait a little longer. Let the enemies come even closer. The commanders have one thing in common in this battle. They are both confident. Hendra feared that Gaoshan Fort would flee. And Richard was worried that Brown Bear's roar would find his ambush. Even Heather focused only on defense, for fear of undermining her opponent's offensive enthusiasm. Gunther reported that the arrow attack was only 20 yards away. The Lord ordered an advance. The barbarians went first. Due to their great height, the cavalry was a little scared. Hendra thought it was an ambush. With all his heart and hope, he could not be defeated. He ordered the heavy cavalry to attack. They were on horses, so they would get to the battlefield faster. Dozens of people turned into 200 people, but they still have an absolute advantage. Richard's infantry needed to gather their strength and hold out a little longer, because heavy cavalry was approaching. Many soldiers of Hendra's army were wounded, and some were even killed. Almost all of his infantry were destroyed by the Lord's army. Hendra tensed a little, but now the hope was in the flanking detachment. They would probably take the Lord's army by surprise. At this moment, suddenly the reeds began to move. This sound from there scared Hendra. These were earth-bearers. They carried crossbows with arrows. The Earth Dragon is a heavy vehicle. His dash is extremely strong, and his agility is his only weakness. At such a short distance, they will not have the opportunity to change their course. Their arrival frightened the aristocrats' soldiers. To force a turn at this time would mean giving the enemy the most vulnerable flank, which would be tantamount to suicide. The detachment on horseback retreated, but the land-bearers on the contrary advanced. They scattered enemies like balls, but a little later, having gathered its strength, the cavalry detachment advanced to the attack. Some managed to get to crossbows. The second cavalry detachment came from the other flank. They still tried to attack with crossbows, and many succeeded. Now it's the turn of the shaman and the trolls to show themselves. Using a spell, she summoned a devastating fireball. He fell right on target. Hendra's people certainly did not expect this. Moreover, no one could even think that the Lord had such a strong shaman on his side. The trolls didn't waste any time either. They used magic to attack the mounted detachment. This helped knock them off their feet and buy them at least a little time. Hendra was very angry about all these events. He was naturally angry with himself too. He knew nothing about his opponent and went into battle. Without thinking twice, it seems that the time has come. He turned to his griffin. He ordered him to kill the shaman and 2 trolls. The bird obeyed its owner and could not disobey him. He immediately went on the attack. The aristocrat ordered the remaining troops near him to prepare for battle. They understood that this was a big risk for them, but they also could not disobey. During this battle, the shaman noticed something happening behind her. It was a griffin. He scattered people and rabbits in different directions, and it was obvious that his target was a shaman. Modil, in a panic, ordered the trolls to immediately fold, because they were now at gunpoint. The trolls decided to use their magic to delay him a little. Hendra's griffin also possessed the power of fire and could breathe it. The shaman decided that she needed to try again to release fireballs. She began to whisper the necessary spells. At the last moment, she released a fireball to stop the griffin's blasts of fire. This ball hit its target directly. The second ball exploded over the heads of the enemy infantry. Meanwhile, Richard and the barbarians were still fighting side by side. He saw that he was being attacked from behind. Having activated the system, the Lord eliminated all the attackers with a powerful blow. The infantry was frightened by such enormous power, they even thought that he was not a lord, but a real monster. Hendra was already rushing towards the Lord at that moment. His strength was great, but the Lord's strength is many times greater, and soon this will become clear to everyone. Richard repulsed his first attack. With this clash of swords, they both flew away from each other a good couple of meters. The Lord even got a little dust in his eyes. The boss couldn't help but notice that the aristocrat had a very strong fighting spirit. The soldiers of the mighty bear's roar were glad for their leader's graceful entrance, as expected of their lord. They thought that with him, they would now definitely be able to win. Having tuned into a conversation with the enemy, Hendra introduced himself and asked the caller to do the same. It seems that Richard was not going to do this, since he replied that he allegedly did not deserve such an honor, and for the causeless invasion of the Gaoshan fort, he sentenced him to death. And then he mockingly asked if he wanted to say something before he died. But on the contrary, it was Hendra who was waiting for his death most of all. He would say his words, but first he intended to shut this lord's mouth. He raised his sword, thereby inviting him to join the fight. Now he was looking closely at Richard. Their blades crossed. Let the equal duel begin. But after several attempts, Hendra received the first blow. He had already blocked the lord's next blow. This came as a big surprise to the boss, and he praised Hendra for being so well prepared. Hendra thought it was good that he had the power of the unloading effect. Otherwise, he would not be able to withstand the blows of the enemy's sword. He hoped that this power would help him win. He was so sure that right now. Now the Lord is about to come to an end. The aristocrat soldiers understood what such confidence was about. They were happy about this outcome of events. Even if it's a little unfair, the Lord thought that they had a regular army, but they, it turns out, are only capable of one small and unexpected attack. But it's good that he has a lot of skills that will help him a lot now. In this case, the Lord had one cool trick. He asked the system to activate the power of radiance. Great power filled his body. Thanks to this technique, he did not strain too much to defeat the enemy. He first eliminated the enemy soldiers from his back, and then he eliminated those who attacked from the side. The infantry and other enemy soldiers were shocked. The shaman called the Lord to save her. The griffin was still chasing her and the trolls. He tried to destroy them with fire. Modil shouted to her boss that they would soon catch up with her and eat her. Suddenly, the whistle of an arrow was heard. It hit the griffin right in the throat, but she didn't hit him. Heather released her. She ordered the remaining centaurs to attack and shoot at the griffin. It was so unexpected that the griffin didn't even have time to do anything to save himself. All the arrows fired by the centaurs hit him. Hendra's soldiers saw what happened to their master's griffin. Hendra himself became very angry and could not find a place for himself. He drew his sword and went on the offensive again against Lord Richard. He called all his enemies freaks. Their blades came together again. Richard said that they were the first to suddenly attack, and the Lord's people turned out to be the monsters. Taking advantage of the situation, the boss pushed the aristocrat away from him. However, he did not intend to kill him. Hendra thought that he could not be defeated. After all, his magical armor has the indestructible power of fire. The more the Lord attacks, the greater the armor's strength becomes. But Richard kept attacking and attacking, but nothing happened to the armor. No force was added. Has it really stopped working? This can't be true. Hendra didn't understand what was wrong with the reflective power of the fire. Why didn't his fire element work on this Lord? The boss hit his sword with all his might, and he broke it in half. The Lord once again kicked the now defenseless Hendra. Weapons are just weapons. Lord believed that if Hendra could not fight without his sword, then he was not worthy of the title of leader. He also said that the fire element of his magic armor is definitely cool. My hands were already covered in blisters. But how is this possible? After all, this 5-time fire element attack is enough to incinerate an ordinary person. And this Lord only burned his hands, unthinkable. He was shocked and sad at the same time. He had no choice but to admit defeat. His soldiers could not believe their ears and eyes. For the first time, they saw that their master was able to admit defeat. This meant that Richard's army had won. Gunther said it was worth catching all these people and making them her hostages. The Lord agreed with her, but first Hendra. But first, he most wanted to take his magic armor from him. Approaching it, he discovered that the armor was broken. The Lord himself broke it. He himself could not understand why he was so enraged. The boss began to shed tears. His charm suffered because of himself. Annie asked if he was okay, and the tigress actually thought that he was wounded. He showed Annie the armor and said that he had been shot right in the heart. She didn't have the right words. Annie was glad he wasn't hurt. It's good that she didn't waste half a bottle of her holy water that she had left over on him. The tigress noticed a magic crystal on the armor. She decided to ask about it. Suddenly she was mistaken. It is said that magic crystals are so expensive that their price cannot be measured in gold coins. They are considered an essential material for creating magic equipment. But this equipment has already come to an end. Tigress advised that the Lord take her to a blacksmith so that he could remake the armor. Then the crystal will work again. Richard was surprised that everything was so simple. The tigress replied that if she wants to believe, she believes, but if she doesn't, she doesn't. But she warned him that even if he repaired it, he still wouldn't be able to use it. After all, this magical armor was not made for him. The Lord had no words, only emotions, but it wasn't really that important to him. He threw it away and said, "That let Laobi do this, but now he has more important things to do." A rather large ransom would probably be given for these captives, so the Lord ordered the tigress to deal with it. Annie reported that there was still one issue to be resolved regarding the remaining spoils of war. It seemed like that luggage and horses could be sold, and a lot of money could be earned. It's true, the Lord didn't think about it. He wanted to cook horse meat. Annie said that these prisoners could also be sold to a trade union specializing in the sale of prisoners. It would be much more convenient that way. Each person can be sold for 4 or 5 gold coins. The Lord was surprised that there were so many. Annie and the tigress stepped aside to discuss everything again. After all, the tigress dealt with prisoners, and Annie knew a lot in this area. Compared to the two of them, the boss's knowledge of commerce was simply excellent. Of course, this is sarcasm. In addition to military assistance, there were many different laws and rules in this world, and Richard would do well to learn them all. There were now more than enough bronze weapons to completely fill the palace storage, and then they could all forget about the problem of poverty for a while. In addition, his entire army improved all their skills quite well, especially the lizardmen. They improved their strength well during this battle. They were now the elite warriors in the system. Even the levels of the earth dragons had increased. Their muscles and bodies had increased greatly. All this thanks to their experience in team combat. It was simply amazing. Their performance is better than just good. Late evening, all the close people and the Lord himself sat down to dinner. The tigress said that she would like to advise that this time the Lord should go with her to the city to exchange coins. But he did not understand why this was necessary. And it was all because this time their enemy was an excellent legion of guard Stuarts, and relations between Pompeii and the Stuarts have been very tense lately. Therefore, if a lord encounters an invasion from the Stuarts, then it is worth immediately reporting this to the House of Lords. But in reality, this will not be considered an invasion. But that was not for him to decide. The Lord wondered if the lords of Pompeii might make a big fuss about this. Annie knew that the Pompeii lords loved to create red tape. They just wanted to get caught up in something. And since they were now involved in this matter, they, in theory, should also cook a little in this soup. Richard found this to be true. So he decided that in a couple of days they would go there, but only with Annie. 6 days were spent collecting all the booty and prisoners, after which the Lord and others set out. The Lord finally realized that Hendra was improving himself with sacred prayers. But at first he remained silent on this statement. Hendra thought about his current situation and realized that it couldn't get any worse. Then apparently he got tired of it all and replied that the Lord understood everything correctly. Richard laughed at him, saying that if Hendra grew a mustache, it did not mean that he became a man. But for Hendra, there were only sacred prayers. Only they can provide such powerful force without vibration of the basic elements. He was right. This is indeed the art of prayer. But Richard was not going to give him a pie for the correct answer. Hendra could not resist and asked what rank the Lord had. Even the fire element attack had no effect on him. But the Lord only replied that there were still small problems with the fact that he could not yet switch to apocalypse mode. The aristocrat did not understand until recently how this was possible. It turned out that Hendra realized that the Lord had already reached solar rank, which is second only to apocalypse mode, and he still dreamed of capturing his fortress. He asked the boss what he meant when he said problems. The problem is that he hasn't even reached Manhwa yet. This was the last straw for Hendra. It seems that he lost consciousness from what he heard. A few days later, Richard and his company finally reached the city of Solon, and now he suddenly realized that time had flown by so quickly, and yet recently he had come to this very city himself without anyone. But now he is no longer the same as he was then. Now Richard is already the owner of thousands of elite soldiers and hundreds of powerful centaurs. Returning to this city again, he now felt completely different. Due to the fact that the vast majority of people wanted to follow Annie to complete the deal, the Lord was left hanging around just like that, and he had no choice but to find a place to wait for the others. He went to the bar. When he got there, he discovered that ale without ice still tastes as weird as it ever did. The bartender told him that at this time of year it would be a luxury to waste winter ice and magical creations. He apologized to him for this. And at that moment a man came into the bar and ordered 3 mugs of dark ale, and quickly. He also ordered fried shank. Then I thought a little more and ordered beef tongue and 3 sandwiches with butter. But the money he gave up was not enough to fully pay for the order. After all, gold coins were needed, not copper. But they got angry and asked if he knew who their owner was. Richard thought they were a bunch of screaming louts, but it turned out that these people worked for him. But for some reason he didn't know about it. One of these men approached Richard, not knowing that this was his owner. And he asked that, judging by his reaction, he must know who this lord of the high mountain fortress is. The bartender asked them if this was the same Lord Richard, the Scarlet Ripper, whom all savages admire. But the man also boasted that, moreover, they had recently defeated the entire Stuart army with only 300 men. The lord was surprised that Annie was so fast. They entered the city only a few hours ago, and the news had already spread so quickly. The man who ordered lunch must be the lord of the high mountain fortress. Richard laughed at this, but decided to ask about it. The fake lord seemed to be thinking a little about something, and then he swung his sword. He then said that it was his huge sword with which he beheaded the dragon. Now all the people around believed that he really was the Scarlet Ripper. He swung his sword so easily, a true strongman, but the real Richard believed that this sword was made of low-quality iron, because its weight and lightness are only 1/5 of the weight and hardness of real iron, and these men who were with him must be Gunther and Heather. This was even funnier. After all, in reality Gunther and Heather are girls. Therefore, the boss decided to make a joke, and asked that Heather was a centaur, and not actually a person. To which the fake Veresk replied that under no circumstances should one believe these rumors. He excused himself by saying that his horsemanship was so refined, that he is almost like a centaur. This is what was meant. The boss thought that if something serious happens, then 80 or even 90% of the time some scammers appear immediately. Everything that was now happening before his eyes, although different from reality, was quite reasonable and not lacking in details. But the real lord still decided to say that he considered Heather to be a centaur, not a human. To which the people from the bar replied that since Heather is not real, according to him, it turns out that Gunther and Richard are too. Another man from the bar said to look closely at his sword again. It is so big that it simply cannot be Lord Richard himself. And suddenly the real lord decided to report that he is the same Richard. He waited for their reaction. Fake Gunther said that he was funny and asked where he was going to go. The real one replied that it was to the noble garden, but the fake ones were also going there. The false heroes announced that very soon they would set off on a merchant caravan. And then there was a puncture. This is a trade caravan. But they still knew what he looked like. They also said that they were going there to establish contact with very large figures. They also joked that they could take him with them. Annie arrived just as the fake ones were leaving. She asked who they were, but the Lord chose not to tell her anything about it. He simply replied that they were his old friends. He said that the caravan would wait for now. He needed to go now to the noble garden to talk with Sauron. Arriving there, he met a maid who asked what he was doing there. She also said that my lord Sauron went to see him at the high mountain fortress a few days ago. Richard clearly didn't expect this. He set off only 4 days ago, but how could a lord make such a mistake? And suddenly a heavy hand fell on his shoulder. It was Sauron. In order to return from the high mountain fortress as quickly as possible, they brought in 6 high-class war horses and used wind magic to speed up. Richard was surprised that it only took them 4 days to go there and back. The lord also asked what happened and why it was so urgent. Sauron reported that their lords from Pompeii had started a war with the Stuarts. This was terrible news. My lord Sauron called him to come with him. They went into my lord's office. Sauron opened the curtains to make it a bit brighter. He then pointed to the letter lying on the table and asked Richard to take it. Richard found something funny in his gesture and laughed at the fact that my lord was trying to create a more atmospheric atmosphere. He didn't understand why, because they weren't on such close terms. The letter said, "We will take revenge for the vile attack on Lord Richard. Let the war begin." And below the script it was written that this was a decree from the executive chamber of Pompeii. The lord was angry that because of this, the lord still decided to declare war on the Stuart kingdom. This, of course, flattered him a little, but he did not think that his high mountain fortress would ever be associated with such a historical moment. The lord noticed that his majesty was indeed correcting mistakes, although his fortress was attacked, but they were not seriously damaged. Sauron asked if Richard really thought that this war began just because of this attack on them. Did he really mean that the lord was just bait? But in fact, it was the Stuarts who first declared war on the lords of Pompeii. My lord asked him to look for himself and make sure of everything. He took the next letter and began to study its contents. The letter stated that while on a routine military patrol, Hendra came across a wanton attack from Pompeii, putting up stiff resistance, and unfortunately he died. Richard was angry that it was clear that they were simply defending themselves from a surprise attack from a member of the Stuart family. But in the letter, everything was made out as if they were the ones who attacked first. And how could they still not know that Hendra was alive? But I didn't care about that. Until they admit it themselves, they will never believe that it is him. This old grudge has long reached its boiling point. Now everything can only be resolved by war. The boss wondered what the old grudge was. 5 years ago, Pompey and the Stuarts discovered a mine with magic crystals on our porn border. The reserves were simply impressive, but they never determined who owned this mine. It was not surprising that both sides were ready to declare war for the sake of a mine with crystals. Sauron asked him if he was afraid of the coming storm. But of course, with the system, the Lord could not be afraid. My lord asked him to stay for a few days, because one person really wanted to meet him. Richard asked why they couldn't meet right now. But it turned out that this man was very busy. The Lord asked who this man was, to which I received the answer that it was His Majesty. A few days later, they went to someplace together. Sauron was the first to knock on the door and ask permission to enter. He opened the door and entered first. They were invited to come closer. The man said that he detained the Lord for several days and asked for forgiveness for this. But the Lord replied that it was nothing to worry about. He said that the two countries had declared war on each other and asked what Richard himself, as the nominal party, thought about it. The Lord did not understand what this meant, and therefore asked Sauron. He in turn explained that Your Majesty knew that in this war Pompey needed a hero who could inspire the military spirit of the squad. Richard didn't know what to answer, but with all his might he did not want to be dragged into this matter, because such a hero was destined to die long ago. Your Majesty asked who, in the Lord's opinion, is most suitable for this role of hero. Of course, no one else remained except Sauron, so he proposed his candidacy. But my lord asked him not to talk too much. On the contrary, he believed that Richard was more suitable for this candidacy. And besides, in the decrees about the war of both states his name was written, the owner of the high mountain fortress. His Majesty asked them not to accept this position as something difficult. Then he asked Sauron to pour everyone a glass of wine, but choose a bottle that was 50 years old. My lord left for a couple of minutes. The military corps was ready to give him the title Knight Eagle. This is a very rare honor in times of peace. But the Lord decided to excuse himself by saying that their village detachment in the high mountain fortress is nothing but thieves, and they experience poverty from time to time. However, if Your Majesty could share half of the Honorable Palace's division with the Lord, he would agree to think about this proposal. Sauron heard about this, and asked him how he could even think of half a division of this palace. His Majesty asked to discuss this later, because he had one more matter that he would like to ask the Lord about. The Skari tribe recently answered the call of Pompey, but halfway there they went missing. And the high mountain fortress is located exactly in the place where they disappeared. So His Majesty asked him if he knew where they were. After all, they are born warriors. No one can easily accept their loss. Richard intercepted them halfway, but of course he didn't say anything about it. He asked not to talk about it anymore for now. The Lord didn't know why, but at that moment, an unimaginable fire of justice burned in his heart. He agreed to become an Eagle Knight. But still, the Lord asked if they had changed their minds about his candidacy. It is the duty of every Pompeian to serve his country selflessly. And of course, it was good that Richard recognized this debt and took on all the trouble. In addition, being an Eagle Knight, he will receive glory and great honor. And his soldiers can be enlisted out of turn in the Dragon Claw detachment. But they will not be required to obey. They will have greater autonomy. Richard remembered this detachment. They were famous for their great cruelty and bloody battles. But whether this squad was good or bad, it didn't matter. This battle will not be easy for both sides. Sauron warned him that he should not worry so much, because His Majesty also served in this legion. The Lord guessed that His Majesty's son was also here. Yes, Bedrick really was in the palace. The Lord thought it was excellent. The detachment in which the prince serves will suffer the least, and there will be more merit. Since they had discussed everything so well, His Majesty did not detain Richard any longer and asked him to rest. The Lord thanked him for everything. On the way, the Lord asked Sauron about His Majesty's sight. It turned out that he sees almost nothing. Richard didn't understand it at first, even though he saw his gray eyes. But his sense of revenge is very deep, and his ability to understand the world with the help of this feeling and spiritual power is no worse than seeing everything with his eyes. The Lord thought it was cool. In fact, the strength of past rulers was average. This does not mean at all that they were stupid. It's just that power requires double effort, energy, and time. And His Majesty was just able to cope with this. For the Lord, it seemed too strange that one man would praise another so much. Sauron wanted to tell something else about His Majesty, but the Lord stopped him in time. He asked if he should go to the Dragon's Claw and meet everyone there. My lord replied that it was indeed worth it. They headed there. 20 minutes later, they were there. They arrived just in time for training. They were met by a guard and informed that this was the location of the Legion. He asked them to tell him what made them come. Sauron introduced the Lord and said that he was here by order of His Majesty. He was surprised that the lord of the high mountain fortress himself came to them. The guard invited them to come with him. Richard thought the guard was behaving strangely. Milord also didn't understand why he reacted so strangely. A couple of minutes later they arrived. The guard opened the door for them and said that now they would find out the whole truth. There were also fake Richard, Gunther, and Heather in the room. The real lord was very angry when he saw them. The lord was so angry that he promised to finish off these imposters. Sauron was also at a loss when he learned the whole truth. Then a man came up to him and asked him to forgive them for this joke. They didn't mean anything bad. Richard was not taken aback and asked who they were. In fact, this man was Prince Bedrick. Sauron and the lord called his name in unison in an exclamation. My lord didn't believe it at first, so he asked again. But it really was him. The lord still couldn't believe it at all. The fake Richard is a member of the court division. His name was Bayan. And the fake Heather is a top-level swordsman from Solon. They have no skin or faces. Why did the lord still believe them? They looked like typical slackers and traitors rolled into one. Most kings had several sons to make it easier to choose an heir. But here his majesty stood out very much. He had only one son. What a powerful portent of the fall of the state. The lord approached the guard who brought them and asked if he had seen these people before. But he had never seen them before. Why hadn't he seen him before? Because his majesty Bedrick served in this legion. But in fact, he was listed here only nominally, and today he came for the first time. Now many noble children have learned to simply sign up for service. The current generation was indeed worse than the current one. The lord asked who this commander was, but he also wondered why they were pretending to be someone. Bedrick replied that it would be very difficult for the lord to understand the soul of an unfortunate person who has no talents. Of course, Richard did not understand what it meant to be a person without talent. Bedrick's talent was no different from wood or stone. In this world, everything that exists has its own talent and strength, even leaves or stones. However, history is not short on talent, but a great wise person can become so by relying on hard work, resources, and luck. Unless you're mediocrity. The lord guessed that Bedrick wanted to say that he was untalented. He really was nothing of himself. It's good that he admitted it so calmly. His Highness has superior elemental talent and can absorb elements on his own without even thinking about it. But His Highness has a special physique, and these elements will affect him. Therefore, on a weekly basis, he must specifically engage in clearing the accumulation of elements in his body. But in general, elemental wielders cannot expel the elements from their own bodies in the same way that a magician would never bother with a fireball held in his hand. In fact, His Majesty's strength was different at birth, but it became so after a severe illness he experienced 4 years ago. Bedrick heard that the Lord could pass through an army of thousands with the power of his body. This made his heart flutter. Richard wondered how long he could continue to pretend and suffer, but still he asked His Highness not to think about it and somehow visit his fortress as a guest. He also decided to ask what about the commander of this legion, if it was possible to talk to him. Lately he has often been in the garrison. The Lord understood him, yet he also liked to hold meetings without pressing problems. However, when the two states declared war on each other, he could not stay here for so long. He urgently needed to return to Gaoshan, and when everyone was sharpening their knives and preparing for war, the only thing everyone was faced with was years of idleness. Gaoshan could barely keep up with the latest news that the messenger brought. This is the Church of Light. They gave the two countries the signature of the Pope. An attempt to smooth out the conflict in the future will break out into war. It is necessary to protect the population. Annie hoped there would be no war. But the conflict may be resolved, but the issue itself is not resolved. If there is a battle, so be it. It's only a matter of time. The Lord was still idle, so he ordered Hendra to be brought to him for trial. It was originally planned that it would be received in exchange for a ransom. In the end, Stuart sent him to certain death to start a war, so he couldn't do anything. The letter also mentioned that the Church of Light and the Church of the Goddess of Ice and Snow clashed with each other in front of His Majesty, and it ended with the Church of the Goddess of Ice and Snow simply leaving the hall. In this war, perhaps, the Church of the Goddess of Ice and Snow will not enter the battlefield with Pompey. But Richard really didn't understand how it was possible to offend such a powerful force as the Church of the Goddess of Ice and Snow, right on the eve of the war. Tigris suggested that perhaps he did not find out all the necessary information due to the fact that the text was somewhat vague. He realized that this church was very powerful. Its strength was comparable to the strength of an entire country. His Majesty Sagra will not allow discord in his country, so they will definitely fall apart. Richard asked Annie and the Tigris who they thought would win this war. Annie heard that their strength is equal, which is why they can start such a large-scale war. But this is outdated information. It is more than 30 years old. Once King Sagra ascended the throne, he did not have the same thirst for greatness and glory as the previous rulers. Pompey was able to revive and is now thriving. Tigris rarely praises people for their actions, but Sagra was able to become a powerful ruler. Balone of the Stuart family is a perfect example of a fallen monarch. He is vicious and greedy. They are opposite to each other. Their powers have not been similar for a long time. From these arguments, Richard realized that Pompey probably would not win. But if the matter concerns a war between two states, then the issue can be resolved quite simply. But as soon as entry into other countries is closed, the situation will become much more difficult. Tigris meant that someone from the neutral side also wants to have a hand in this war. More often than not, the biggest winner is the third party who decides to intervene. The soldiers have already brought Hendra to trial. The Lord turned around in his steps, finally waited for the commander of the Roaring Bear Legion. Hendra said that he was no longer of any value to him and asked him to simply judge him already. But whether he is valuable or not is not for the Lord to decide, but for himself. He needed to tell something that would be interesting to the Lord, otherwise his sword would decide for everyone. But first he removed his shackles. Before telling his secrets, the Lord gave him a letter to look at. It was a shock when he learned that the Stuarts had declared war on Pompey. What Hendra should have actually cared about was that he was dead to everyone. His country disowned him. In this case, it was better for him to tell what interested the Lord most. After all, his life is now worthless and hardly anyone will notice if he dies now. Hendra started talking about some kind of artifact and that he knew where it was. It sounded like some kind of nonsense. The Lord asked not to fool him. But to be precise, this is a creation from the era of the ancient Titans. About 10 years ago, Hendra and his father went to the Winter City to attend a banquet on the occasion of the coming of age of Lord Magellan's daughter. When the Lord was young, being a famous traveler, he brought back many magnificent treasures from different countries. That day he opened his treasury to the public. Hendra was also there. An ivory bracelet immediately caught his eye. The Lord said that this was a ritual bracelet from one of the clans of savages and not a piece of jewelry at all. But Hendra knew that this was not a ritual bracelet. It's not even a bracelet, it's a ring. The ring that the gods themselves wore. The Titans. This is a thunder ring. The Titan king who ruled that era created a whole set of bones from the bones of the rebels. They had the following names: Ring of Thunder, Ring of Hot Iron, Ring of Earth Veins, and Ring of Sea Storm. They were in the hands of the 4 Titans. This legend is very popular. It says that if you collect all 4 rings, you can get invisible power. The Lord hoped that Hendra had obtained it. But no, Lord Magellan is a very powerful man, and he would not ask him for anything. But he must not have yet revealed this secret himself because this could play into his hands. But Richard didn't think so. The higher the level of magic items, the more imperceptible the fluctuations in their energy are. So the energy of the Thunder Ring cannot be detected. Even if it was an artifact, it could only be used by the Titans themselves. Richard has just one such titanium. However, no one could find this artifact for a long time. How did Hendra manage to understand that it was him if he was a child? Because Hendra was kissed by God. As the name suggests, he is a lucky person who is blessed by the gods and has special powers. Richard wondered what kind of abilities he had if he didn't feel anything like that. Hendra said that his right eye cannot see at all. The young lord was horrified that he was blind, but this was not entirely true. He cannot see things, but he can discern shine, colors, and vibrations of energy. And the reason he was truly confident that this ring was because of its ability. It emitted a special golden glow that was only visible to Hendra's eye. Richard thought this was a cool ability. The Lord asked Hendra to immediately inspect everything in his fortress. Perhaps something valuable would be found. But from what was nearby, Hendra saw only Chiu-Chiu. But there seemed to be nothing else of value in the high mountain fortress. Richard asked if he had told anyone about his talent. But when Hendra realized what it was, he was already an adult and accordingly did not tell anyone anything. But why? It turned out that this was for security reasons. After all, the discovery of his talent to people could begin the countdown of his life. Maybe it's anatomical studies or alchemical experiments or something like that. Special parts of a monster's body can be used to create magical creations. Perhaps its eyes can also be used. Hendra was very scared, but it was a joke. There were no alchemists in the fortress. Hendra could no longer return to the Stuarts, and so Richard invited him to join him. He asked what would happen if he refused. In this case, eternal imprisonment awaited him. The aristocrat had 2 conditions. If the Lord did not agree, then Hendra chose to die in captivity. The first condition: you should never mock his eye. But Richard had always been kind to his subjects. Hendra could be sure of that. The second condition: although he was a prisoner of war, he refused to join as a slave unless as a citizen. The Lord accepted all these conditions. Then, Hendra swore that he would be faithful to him until his last breath. Hendra should have come up with a new name for herself. Without thinking twice, he uttered only one word: Dracula. From now on, he is Dracula and has nothing to do with the Stuart Kingdom. This Hendra is so two-faced. Who would have thought that the system would approve him so quickly? He might still be angry about not having access to the biggest system benefit at Alpine Castle. Cool late autumn gradually arrived, and Richard finally received military help. His Majesty handed him something that looked like a coffin. His Majesty wanted the Lord to fight with humility to the point of death in battle. In fact, it was an inner-world teleport. It was all strewn with magic crystals. He could magically accumulate magical power every 2 weeks and teleport one person to a location he specified. However, they were fighting a large war, and teleporting only one person every half-month was quite insignificant. Richard had to be grateful for that too, since, if not for the insistence of His Highness the Prince, he would not have received this magical gift. His Highness asked the servant to convey a message. Boldly kill your enemies and achieve your goals. But in fact, he said that if they could not win, then let them run. War is a matter of the country, but life is your personal life. November, the church was no longer able to resolve the conflict successfully, and a war was about to break out. Richard in turn led the group to the city of Solon to meet the larger army. The Lord chose such a beautiful name for his army, but he was given such a terrible banner. A great war was coming, and the once barren lands outside Solon were occupied by a few legions. Heather believed that such weather was not suitable for war. Gunther replied that when this war was declared, no one thought that this autumn would be so cold. Richard noticed a huge animal, a bit like their earthly dragons. The shaman noticed the sorcerer and warned the Lord about it. He looked very impressive. It was a priest from the Ice Goddess Church. In the past, each legion was entitled to 20 spiritual ministers, but this year there are only 10 of them, half as many. Bedrick came to take the Lord to the pre-war meeting and asked him to capture his banner. Before leaving, he asked Heather to take everyone to lunch. All leaders and commanders were required to attend the preliminary meeting. Bedrick did not like the Lord's banner, but it was made in the high mountain fortress. Bedrick offered to come back later and replace them. When the meeting is over, there will be a procession of all the legions with the banners of the troops. The leader of the Dragonclaw Legion arrived on the scene. In military circles, he was always characterized as a wise but indecisive man, capable of being responsible for his actions, but not for the general situation. The Lord did not understand why he became commander-in-chief this time too. Just a few years ago, Savok took on the responsibility of commanding the troops, when his partner's boss resigned due to illness. Coming closer, Savok greeted Bedrick and Lord Richard. Bedrick asked not to call him Your Highness, since there is no such thing in the army. But His Highness is His Highness everywhere, and there is no need to be modest. If this title exists anywhere in the kingdom, then the barracks is no exception. Savka was interested in what they all thought about this war, but so far no one dared to say anything. Since there were no strangers in this circle, he asked not to be modest and to tell everything as it is. Based on his 20 years of military experience, he did not think that Stuart could match Pompey's army. They chose the wrong time and the wrong opponent, and His Majesty Balone Stuart can still inherit the title of Mad King. Whether Lord Savok is really so optimistic, only time will tell. Burek wasn't sure of the details, but he knew that his father usually didn't do things he wasn't sure about. In this battle, they will have a total of 150,000 men and 4 dragon cavalry on their side. The Dragonclaw Legion will be the vanguard of the army and will be the first to attack. They will make all enemies pay for their gross ignorance. Magellan, whom Dracula spoke of, lives in the fortress of Harsh Winter. This is just in hand. After the meeting ended, the Lord returned to the rest of the guys. The boss did not notice Abu and asked where he was. It turns out that he went to the parade of banners and did not want to return just yet. Heather was wondering what the Lord's banner looked like, but it was just a piece of rag. But she still decided to go and look. What's so great about banners? She shouldn't have been out in the cold, so the Lord stopped her. At that moment, a centaur entered the house and reported that trouble had occurred. The thing was that Abu and the others got into a fight with the Dragonclaw people. Just an hour ago, parade of banners. The lizards watching the parade were delighted with its beauty. In the pile of banners, they saw their own. The guys from the other legion made fun of this banner. They believed that this chicken paw was a shame and poverty. As far as they remembered, this banner was indeed a representative of the high mountain fortress. These people sincerely did not understand what this lord could become famous for. They made fun of him too, because they believed that such a yellow-haired boy was weak for the title of leader. Abu and the other lizards were standing too close, so they heard every word. No one dared to talk like that about the Lord and the high mountain fortress. Therefore, Abu could not restrain himself and hit the guy. But these guys couldn't just stand by when their comrade was beaten. They also rushed into battle. Richard, who arrived on time, was very angry. He didn't understand how they dared to attack the members of the high mountain fortress. Gunther and Heather rushed into battle first. Gunther took on the main offender. Bedrick was already there. When he saw the Lord, he hoped that he would take everyone away. But no one had such intentions. The brawl could not go unnoticed. The guys from this legion could not understand how the Lord's men could fight so hard. They are strong and completely impossible to defeat. Since it was impossible to defeat them with hands, they decided to try with weapons. Bedrick could not stand it and punched the instigator. He couldn't do anything, but he wanted to win. He and the Lord also got into a fight. And at that moment, someone behind them ordered to drop their weapons and stop immediately. It was Lord Savok. He said loudly and seriously that the entire kingdom would be responsible for this stupidity today. Along with him came an adept wizard named Heisenberg. Most of the guys who were knocked to the ground turned out to be Dragon Claw soldiers. Gunther asked where Abu had gone, and at that moment, one of the soldiers reported that something was moving towards them in the distance. It was Abu and the rest of the lizards on the Earth Dragons. They called for this fight to continue. All the soldiers were at a loss as to how the Earth Dragon could obey the lizard. Lord Savok asked Richard to keep his men under control. The Lord assured him that he would personally supervise everything. Richard went out onto the road to stop all this disgrace. Abu noticed him, but the Lord decided to say only one phrase, and that was enough.
He ordered the Earth Dragons to stop immediately.
So many Earth Dragons stopped after the word stop. Everyone who saw this considered everyone from the high mountain fortress to be abnormal. Abu went down to him and began to tell him the whole situation. But the Lord told him to forget about it. It was good for a little fight, but it was their fault that they had summoned the dragons here. Savok could not believe that the Lord had such powerful animals in his fortress. But in truth, they eat quite a lot. But Savok warned that such blatant horror should not happen again, otherwise everyone will face punishment. The commander of the Dragonclaw Company, Buster, appeared. He argued that people are new to this city and they are too cautious in everything. The commander was angry with him that he could not control his people, which means he could not be an officer. But Buster went to Richard and simply said that all the soldiers were excited, because the war with the Stuarts was coming soon. The punishment also applied to the Lord's people. But that couldn't be Buster's responsibility. How can people just stand while they are attacked? Whatever it was impossible to deny that it was the lizards who caused the dragons. The Lord admitted his guilt. Buster disagreed and replied that he, as an officer, should be held accountable for this. It's just fate, or just strange circumstances. This is the reason for this ridiculous farce. Savok ordered them to stop immediately. He knew that now they would both do anything to avoid responsibility. If they could use their brains in battle, they would not have to think about the outcome of all events. The honor that was handed down to them is too heavy for the commander to allow anyone to tarnish it. In accordance with military discipline, Savok decided that regarding this fight, Richard's soldiers and the officer would be included in the vanguard of the special team forward. This was the worst and most unexpected punishment. Buster asked the Lord not to look so sad. Although this was a leading battalion, the enemy was not always in front. Bedrick was next to the Lord, and so he decided to ask why he came here. He decided this on his own, so no one could interfere. After all, the officer believed that the three of them were the most responsible. If they are severely punished, he will not be able to stay away. There was so much snow this year. This is undoubtedly the sign of the goddess of snow and ice. The officer asked the wizard about this. Snow and wind are common natural phenomena. The wizard believed that there was no need to tie this to the goddess of ice and snow. It was not surprising for the officer that out of 10 wizards, this one was named to the vanguard. Command headquarters of the Pompeii Expeditionary Forces. The servant served his master. The doctor did not advise His Majesty to drink a lot of alcohol, but he seemed to have little interest in this. He made things very difficult for his servant. At that moment, Bedrick's father appeared at the door and advised His Majesty Lao Lei to visit the son more often. But he should have known that Lao Lei's effectiveness did not depend on this. This was definitely beneficial. In fact, Lao Lei was afraid that people would find out who was in command of the human expeditionary force. He was a goblin from the most despised race. Also, the goblin is disabled. That's enough. You can't drink anymore. Bedrick's father was sure that his people did not care. He invited the goblin to take a walk because he deserved some fresh air. Liao Lei agreed. Bedrick's father thickened the border of the tuna flame above them. She supported external energy. This was necessary since His Majesty took everything to heart. They met him in a cold and hungry winter. There was a food shortage then. Bedrick's father recalled that when they found that creature, they found His Majesty in its mouth. During his accidental rescue, he discovered something. That the goblin is a god-bearer and, at the same time, very smart. When Bedrick's father became king, he promised that the goblin would continue to use his talents at the state level. Everyone considers Lao Lei a genius who managed to combine teaching with administrative activities. But few know that the real person behind the curtain is the one who pulls you inside. Thanks to Lao Lei, Pompeii is thriving these days. His real majesty once saved his life, so he does everything to help. His Majesty asked about some matter and whether there was any information on it. It seems that there was nothing important there. This matter was about the goddess of religion. Lao Lei asked him to be patient. After all, a ripe apple must one day fall to the ground. The goblin asked how the army was progressing. His Majesty reported that they set out this morning and Richard was temporarily transferred to the 1st Vanguard. It was a good idea, so now we can see what he is like. When the goblin first analyzed the high mountain fortress, he discovered that every step they took was gigantic. He himself was a genius, so he had no doubt that others could work miracles. so he could only explain this by saying that Richard was an unusually great general. The Lord was in excellent spirits, even after everything that had happened. This was not surprising, because he practiced the prayer book to improve himself. According to Richard, Bedrick's dear morning shrimp, Tianchi, and the temple are one and the same. He bored the Lord all the way, and so he asked him to be silent for a little while. The soldiers informed them that they were already near one of the Stuart fortresses. This is the city that gathered a detachment of Stuart troops for its defense. Perhaps there is a whole formed corps numbering from 3,000 to 5,000 people. This area must have been a relatively important military hub. But that was not the case. It's a typical farming town with only one specialty: pumpkins. The soldiers also reported that the walls were thin, the height was no more than a peak, and no guards were found either. This city seemed empty. But Richard thought that it was not so simple. It's most likely a trap to lure them in. Richard climbed onto the earth dragon and looked around, and then went down to the others. He saw that it really was a small farming town. The soldiers on the wall also noticed them and quietly began to prepare their troops. The officer thought he saw a griffin flag on the wall with a red background and gold stripes, and Bedrick knew only 3 legions with griffins in Stuart. The Lord had just such a person who could help in this situation. Hendra learned that this was the ambition of a lion. While there, he once met the chief of their army named Capet. They were just the bottom of the regular legion. Hendra was sure that their army was stronger. In this case, the Lord ordered no one to hesitate and prepare for an attack. The city of Cascade is the seat of the mayor. Baron Capet is the commander-in-chief of the Brave Lions army.